I'm going to share this on our pages real quick.
Okay. Lighting's weird.
Okay, we are live. A'udhu billahi min shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammadin. Kama salli ala Ibrahim wa ali Ibrahim innaka Hamidum Majid. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We praise Allah. We thank Allah for this opportunity. We ask Allah to guide our steps, to make sure we have the sincere intentions all the way through, and anything that we say truthful is from Allah. Anything that is wrong comes from our own error. We ask Allah's forgiveness. Um, so assalamu alaikum, my brother.
Wa
Welcome
alaikum
back.
salam wa rahmatullah.
Um, so today, everybody, we're going to talk about narcissism, its impact on our families, our communities, and we're going to go.
Oh shit. Sorry.
No problem.
Feedback.
We're going to go through several different terms and see where it goes. You know, there's a lot of stuff to talk about that you really can't fit into one episode, but it should be interesting. Um, to start off, can you just define what is narcissism? You mean a lot of people still are not up to speed as exactly what it is.
Okay, so we have to be we have to be careful sometimes because socially, right, we call people narcissists. And that may be accurate, but narcissism is not NPD. It's not narcissistic personality disorder. That only comes with a diagnosis. And sometimes it's hard to understand that because you may be dealing with a person who has NPD, but has not been diagnosed. And in order for a person to be diagnosed, it has to be diagnosed by a professional. So we don't diagnose people. So when we talk about narcissism, we're talking about an extreme, uh, godlike uh, behavior in which um, in which uh, there's a level of selfishness that consumes the people around the person with narcissism. So narcissism is essentially an extreme selfishness at the cost of others, and many times at the cost of the narcissist himself. Um, so when you think about, I always use Donald Trump. Like if you don't understand what narcissism is, um, and not that I'm diagnosing him, but he displays an extreme level of narcissism, right? A level of selfishness and self-centeredness that just is continuously perpetuated out into the public at the cost of others, right? So, and you see, even when you talk about a Quranic definition of narcissism, you will be talking about Pharaoh. The Pharaoh is a is an archetypical narcissist, right? Self-centered, godlike. I'm the god. Worship me. Everything revolves around me. Um, and so there are there are many versions of that type of behavior um, that's defined in the DSM. Um, when you talk about the diagnostics, the way in which mental health orders are diagnosed. So narcissism is a cluster B personality disorder that fits in with histrionic uh, and borderline personality disorder and sociopath and psychopath. So they all fit in the same category. They're all narcissists, but as you move up the ladder, it becomes more and more extreme when you talk about psychopath and sociopaths. But it's not ultimately, and I tell people this, there is a scale of behavior, right? On one side, you have, I always talk about a bell curve. So on one side, you have narcissism, and on the other side, you have empathy. And where you want to be optimal, ideally optimal as a human, is kind of like at the peak of the bell curve. So you have a bell curve from left to right, and then at the top, you have ideally where you want to be selfish enough, right, to be concerned about your own well-being. Allah says in the Quran, don't extend yourself to the point where you become destitute and blameworthy. So it's not 100% empathy, but it's also not 100% self-centeredness. So there has to be a concern for self as well as a concern for others, and that is balanced out in a way that helps you meet an optimal standard. But you have a lot of people, when they come from these deprived families, really they say narcissism is developed in families where there's an overindulgence and an underindulgence. And so what's often missing is the connection from parent to child. And narcissism is always a result of parenting, even if it's not intentional. I hope that was clear.
Yeah. So you had mentioned it's narcissistic personality disorder,
Yes.
being within the group of other disorders, but being distinguished by what exactly?
And so it's interesting, right? Because one of the things you often don't hear people talk about, and I always explain it in this way, that narcissism is a socially transmitted disorder. It's a socially transmitted disorder. So you can, when you look at the data, it shows that there are cultures that produce narcissists at a higher rate versus other cultures that do not. And I don't have the list of the cultures. Some, I think, like Japanese score the lowest on narcissism, where Americans obviously score the highest. And so when you talk about what's the difference is the social context in which how the lack of empathy is going to be portrayed into the society. So narcissism being an extreme, for example, the data says, and I say this all the time, I'm telling you what the data says and also telling you what I believe. The data says that 90% of narcissists are men. And a part of that is how we're socialized, right? Men are socialized to be go-getters, to be to always be on a mission to climb atop the social hierarchy. How we marry is important because the qualities that women tend to look for in men are also the qualities that are most likely to have a higher percentage of narcissists. So when you think of Donald Trump being a wealthy man, being a powerful man, right? Those are characteristics that as you move up the scale of narcissists, those men. So maybe amongst middle class families, you'll have less narcissism per capita in men than you would if you talk about CEOs. So if you talk about CEOs, these are men who would do anything. They don't care about anybody else. Their concern is not anybody else. They'll do anything to climb up top that hierarchy. And so what that does is it means if women are aiming for the top 20% of men, they're most likely going to find narcissists in that group. And so, so when you talk about what differentiates narcissism for, say, like bipolar disorder, psychopathy, and psychopaths. So be mindful that all psychopaths and sociopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are psychopaths and sociopaths. So narcissists lack empathy, but they can, under the right circumstance and context, you can get just a little bit of empathetic attunement from a narcissist, right? If we all, let's say we found somebody that was presenting narcissism, and all of us around them in their circle was aware of it, then they would be forced to acknowledge some things in the moment, right? But as they get back into themselves, it will always reassert itself wherever it can. Unlike the psychopath, there is no empathy in the psychopath, none whatsoever. So that's kind of what distinguishes the narcissist from the psychopath, right? All psychopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are psychopaths. And the psychopath is always looking to eat you alive in ways, and you can hear it in people's language and how they talk about life, how they talk about their relationships. So you can be sitting at a table with a psychopath, and they'll say something like, I wonder how much money is in that cash register over there, right? They're plotting, like they're always thinking of how to take advantage of the next person. Where the narcissist is not necessarily thinking about how to take advantage of the next person. It's just their mode of operation, right? That they've created this imaginary world where they can bend reality to make reality fit what it is that they desire. And so this is why you can never win an argument with a narcissist. One of the worst things they say it is to tell a narcissist that they're a narcissist. They're just going to project it back onto you. But just understanding that there's a concept called the dark triad, right, which talks about the narcissist, the Machiavelli, and the psychopath. So it's just three categories of narcissism that is on a different level. And so that's how you kind of differentiate that the narcissist is probably the lowest of the psychopath and the sociopath, but they're probably more prevalent than the psychopath and the sociopath. Oh, and just one more thing. So I talked about it being a socially transmitted disease. Historically, women have not fallen into the category of narcissism because we haven't promoted women as like the go-getter type, the dominant, the power type. And that's why I said, even though the data says 90% of narcissists are men, I question that. If I had my own research team, I'd do the research myself. But I suspect that amongst African-American descendants of slaves, that you'll have a higher percentage of female narcissists as a result of the matriarchal structure of our families and communities, right? So narcissism is a power grab, and Black women in general dominate the structure of our culture. So I think you'll find more narcissism amongst women in the Black community than you would in the white community. And so we produce women like, I just always use Nicki Minaj as an example, right? This kind of powerful woman that is dominating, that is like, the lyrics of her songs are extremely narcissistic and overpowering, overbearing, and I don't care about anybody else. And you have a lot of women, unfortunately, particularly young girls, who ascribe to that kind of that Rihanna mentality of being a savage, right? And so that's the mentality of a narcissist, right? I dominate, I rule, I get what I want. And also you have amongst when we talk about the different ways in which narcissism presents itself, you have a concept what they call covert narcissism. And covert narcissism is a little bit different than overt narcissism, right? When you think of overt narcissism, you think Kanye West, Nicki Minaj, Donald Trump. When you think of covert narcissism, you think of someone more like, she's in the news right now, so you think of somebody like Jada or what's her name? Halle Berry, right? They're covert narcissists. Like they have this very soft, this kind of, it looks empathic, but it's always, I'm the victim, and they use that victim status in order to dominate the context where they are trying to manipulate and control. So Halle Berry is a textbook example of a covert narcissist, if you know anything about her. And as I've come to discover, Jada, as more things are revealed about how she manages and how she deals with life, you start to see some covert tendencies in her as well. So it's like, it's covert, it's narcissism in a context where socially it's probably not acceptable to be a narcissist. So it morphs into a more secret, covert, or what they call vulnerable narcissist, right? So that's something people should look into, the covert narcissist, especially as it pertains to the ladies.
Okay. And yeah, we definitely want to talk about this, because when we talk about the data, we want to make it relevant to our communities, what we're talking about today. You mean Black community, Black Muslim community.
Yep.
So it's not always going to be the same. You mean, well, most of it's not going to be the same, because our community is structured differently. So we want to make it relevant. When you talk about Trump, how can somebody like that? Okay, he was raised in a wealthy family. You mean, how does somebody like that become a narcissist for me?
So if you recall, I said that narcissism is a result of parenting that is overindulging, meaning you have a parent who essentially gives the child everything they want, right? They give the child everything they want. And the problem with that is it takes away from the authenticity of the human experience, so that the child doesn't connect with another human being. And that's really when you talk about narcissism, you're talking about the lack of connection, the lack of empathy, right? And so as a parent, you kind of have a responsibility to have an actual relationship with your child. So oftentimes what you see and hear people doing is dominating the child. So, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, present peace be upon him, he when you read hadith and you read the biographies, you see his interaction with people who you would consider, quote unquote, socially beneath him in status, right? So here you have this man who's at top of the social hierarchy, but in his relationship to other people, you didn't get a sense that he was dominating over them, right? So that people felt comfortable to be in his space, people felt comfortable to connect with him, ask him any questions that they had. And you oftentimes, people don't give you access to them like that. And that includes, and most likely to be the case with children, because children are the most likely to be dominated. And so their humanity kind of gets pushed down. And so when you talk about how somebody like Donald Trump becomes a narcissist, right? It's a result of his parents attending to his needs in a way that makes them look good as parents, right? So you're talking about a parent who may be who may support you in your achievements, and that's it. Right? Because your achievements make them look good. Like when you're on a basketball court, when you're on a football court, or when you're in college and you're in school, they always talk about, my son attends Harvard, my son attends Yale, my son is captain of, the #1 football team in the nation. But what about the connection that you have with your son? Can he communicate with you? Can he connect with you? Can he have the appropriate emotional state with you? It's like, yeah, he's playing football, but can he tell you when he's not having a good game without you, beating him down? You did this in the game.
Abuse.
Yes, it becomes very abusive. It's always abusive, but it's not. In the overindulgence, it doesn't look like abuse, right? Everybody would think with it, like underindulging a child, meaning not meeting their needs, not feeding them, clothing them, not giving them everything that they need. We all can understand that as abuse. We often don't understand overindulging as an abuse, because all of us have this connection with wealth that we think we want to be rich and we want to be wealthy. And that's actually a more difficult context under which to raise children, right? Which is why you get all this kind of, again, talking about Will and Jada, when people have wealth available, it's actually more difficult to parent under those circumstances, because there is no legitimate reason that you have not to give your kids what they want. And although I wouldn't categorize Will and Jada's children as weird, like I've heard a lot of people saying that their children are weird. The children aren't weird. They're responding to a context where they're not being properly connected to as a result of having everything available to them. And so this is how you create more narcissists, right? If you get everything as a child, you believe yourself to be entitled to everything as a child. And that's not the full range of the human experience. It is very rare that you would get everything you want as a child. And sometimes it's good, like, to be sort of like a middle class family with middle class values, right? Because some things you just can't get because we don't have it. But there's a loving way that you can communicate to the child that we can't get that. Maybe we can get that. Maybe we can work. We can create strategies where the child can work with the parent to get what they need to have their needs met, and so on and so forth. And so that's how you get a person like Donald Trump. You have, like, his father was a wealthy and powerful man in the real estate field. And so you can see then how Donald Trump would always get what he wanted. I think he inherited a lot of money from his father and his father's institution. And we know his father was a narcissist because he was an extreme racist. And you don't get racism. There is no such thing. Like, all racists are narcissists. Like, it's inherent in the ideology of I'm better than you, I'm superior to you, right? And that understanding is narcissism. So when you see racism, you're looking at narcissism on full display. And Donald Trump comes from that, racist and power, right?
Yeah. That's very well explained. That's good. Now, some of these terms, let's start off with love bombing.
So love bombing was it was a term that came from what cults do to get you into their cult, right? So if I want you to join my cult, I'm going to exceed a level of what's going to appear to you empathic attunement, right? I connect with you. I see what your needs are. I get a sense of, and these people are very good at filling you out, investigating you to see what your deepest needs are. And then they use that to meet those needs. So it's what they call mirroring, right? I'm going to investigate you. I'm going to see what you are. I'm going to see what you like. And then they become everything that you need, because they have investigated you. And it's really, to me, the most dangerous step in narcissistic abuse, right? Because it manipulates you at the deepest level. I'm going to be everything you need. If you're a manly man, then I'm going to serve up a level of submission to you that you could not imagine. I'm going to meet your every need. And then once I get you, the objective of this, so you're talking about these cults, they're giving you everything you need. They're telling you how great life is. If you come to our combine, we'll have the fruits and the vegetable and we'll give you the life that you've never had. And then once they get you in, now you believe in them. You believe in what they're saying, and they have you hooked. And so then you start to notice a switch in the treatment. And so how you know it's and this is the unfortunate part, right? How you know it's love bombing is because there's a switch that is turned, and you start to see the devaluation phase. So at first you were great, you are God's creature on earth and all love and joy and happiness. And then the next thing you know, if you have any questions like, hey, what about this or what about that? How dare you question us, right? Like the attitude change. So if you think about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was one person, where Dr. Jekyll is this nice, this kind, this loving, compassionate man. And then you see this image of this like monster just out of the blue. And that's not an indication of a healthy personal identity. It's not to say that people don't get frustrated, but you don't go from this completely loving and compassionate and empathic human being to I'll crush you. And that's how the unfortunate part is, for many people, they don't know it's love bombing until they get to the other side of the devaluation phase. And so a part of the objective is recognizing love bombing is when a person is serving up a level of connection and empathy and compassion that seems to be inordinately extreme. But the objective of love bombing is always to get you in. Like if you think about a drug dealer, on the first transaction, the drug dealer is giving you the best, the most uncut dope that is available, right? And then over time, they start to alter the makeup of the drug, reducing its impact, which makes you want that original high, if you will. You want the original high, that first, that pure uncut. And that's what keeps you hooked in. It's what they call, the term just slipped my mind. It's trauma bonding. Trauma bonding. That's what they call it. So first I get you in, and then I abuse you. And the point, but I keep going back and forth, and you become so addicted to the highs that you ignore and make excuses for the abusive behavior.
Yeah, I have took notes from that trauma bonding. That was going to be one of the questions too. So you can tie that in. How does someone become vulnerable to trauma bonding?
So the first thing you have to know is like, okay, what is a healthy human relationship? And what you'll discover, and I talked about the connection, the empathy. The first step to someone being vulnerable to trauma bonding is, so it's interesting, right? The two extremes, the narcissist and the empath, both come from these abusive structures. Like they're like two sides of the same coin. I think the difference between the two is that there is no scientific research that suggests that narcissism can be treated. It can be treated, but it can't be cured. But the extreme empath could be trained to set boundaries with people who are abusive, right? But nevertheless, these contexts of the overindulging or underindulging parent create both the narcissist and both the empath, which is why they have this almost intrinsic connection to each other, right? I've heard you say this before as well. You know this. Like if you put a narcissist and an empath in the same room of 100 people, and it's one narcissist and one empath, they will find each other, right? They will find each other because there's a draw. What they need from each other is pulling them towards each other. And so when you talk about the trauma bonding, the trauma bonding it occurs from the vulnerability of the structure that gave birth to both of them. And so what they need from each other is what was created in the original context in which the person was developed. So if you have a network of healthy people where people meet each other's needs, where people can be critical of each other without harming or damaging each other, then you have a more fulfilling context in which that extreme love bombing, like other people will be leery of somebody love bombing you, right? But you have a network of these people, and you also have an identity that was created in this network that allows for people to recognize that extreme behavior. But if you come from the context where the narcissist and the empath are created, then they won't have that type of reaction, right? Like they'll have the reaction like, this is my soulmate. And so that's the context that creates. It's like a prerequisite for the trauma bonding that is going to happen. And so the objective is ideally to connect with your children, to listen to them, to hear them out, to give feedback to them about what the experience was, so that they are practiced in being connected with other beings, and they can get a sense when a person is giving them a superficial connection versus a deep and intimate connection. And so when empaths are almost thirsty for what the narcissist bring, right? And that's where they instantly connect and bond. And then so now even in abusive situations, this is what makes it hard for people to get out of abusive situations, because even though the abuse is there, that person has met a need for them that no one else around them has been able to meet. So you have people who come from these, George K. Simon cause them that they're like hunger. They're hungry for validation. And so the narcissist sense that hunger for validation, they throw out the bait, and the empath catches on, and now they're hooked. You know, once you're on the line, it's like there's some tugging and pulling, but you will be reeled in. And so that's how trauma bonding occurs. The context, there's a prerequisite, and then the prerequisite sets the stage for you to be connected with an abusive person, particularly psychologically about it, because I don't want it to be framed just as physical abuse. The context for all physical abuse is psychological abuse. So psychological abuse has to occur first. And the first step of psychological abuse is love bombing. And love bombing is what gets you hooked in, and now you're trauma bonded. You can't let go of the person because you want that thing that you got from them that you could never get from the people around you. So in order to avoid that, we want to have healthy families, healthy communities, where people have a network of relationships that protect them from these people who are psychological abusers. And so that brings in gaslighting, but I'm sure that's coming up.
Yeah. But giving people a clearer picture, because for those that don't know, those who are narcissists, they're really fragile. They really don't have a true sense of self, right? And they depend on others to give them that sense of self, right? So they really are insecure, right?
Yes. When you talk about so these are some, when you talk about the details, when you get into the science of how is a narcissist created. So I talked about the overindulging and the underindulging. And ultimately what it is just a lack of intimate connections during the development phase, right? When a child is born, it is the child has no capacity whatsoever to meet its own needs. When you think of an infant only has two emotions, right? Laughter. So you can look at an infant and smile with it and connect with it, and the infant will smile at you. The infant is doing what is called mirroring, right? They look at you, they see you happy, and then they mirror back the happy reflection of the parent. That's why people, when they hold a baby, when they see an infant, if they're healthy, right, they are like, you can't help but smile at the child. Like, it's so cute, it's so fragile, it's so innocent, and it just brings out a level of humanity in you to have the infant. But what happens is, in an underindulgent parent, they don't connect with the child in that manner, right? There's no connection with the infant. And so the infant has nothing to mirror back. And so as the infant develops in this underconnected context, it realizes that it's not going to get its emotional needs met. And so what the child does is creates an alternative reality. Let's say an alternative identity. Except in this world, in the imagination world that the child creates to protect itself from the reality, they control everything. So that's where you get the godlike complex from the child, right? They control everything. And so they can bend reality to its needs. So they don't have, so in an ideal world, your mother would be loving and connecting. But in the context where the mother is not, and I only say the mother because that's the initial connection, right? That's where the child gets its nurturing from. And you learn, like, right, breastfeeding, for example. Children who are breastfed are more empathic. Why? Because the five senses are developing and connecting and stimulating the growth of the brain. So the child is close enough to the mother to smell the milk. It is getting nurtured through the senses. If you're a breastfeeding mother, you know, as the child is feeding you, the child is grabbing you, touching you. All of that stimulates brain growth. And it stimulates brain growth in a way that makes the child have the highest opportunity for being empathic. Versus, and I've seen this even when I was growing up as a child, where some mothers, they don't breastfeed. They give the child formula in a bottle, and they'll like give the child the bottle and prop the bottle up like on some pillow or something, right? The child is not connecting to another human being during the developmental process. And so what happens is So the brain goes through a process called pruning as it's developing. Based on the environment, as the brain grows, things that it don't need, it just prunes off. It prunes off. And so if the child is growing up in a context where its emotional needs aren't being met, it starts to prune off characteristics of those emotional capacities. And so that's where you get, if most professionals will tell you that narcissists have an emotional capacity of a 4-year-old toddler at best. And a part of that is a result of not having that attunement and connection. And so when you talk about the development of the when you talk about the development of the narcissist as from a clinical perspective, that's where it's coming from. It's coming from going without and not having the child's needs being met. And so they don't have the capacity. That's why they say there's no cure for it, because it's so deeply embedded in their identity. And they create this false identity where they are God and they control everything. And the false identity prevents them from creating an actual identity, right? And so what you'll see is, based on what their needs are, they will morph their identities to get the supply that they're looking for that never really fills them up. That's why they go through relationships, they go through jobs, right? They have a cycle that they go through of love bombing, devalue, discard, love bombing, devalue, discard. And so you see this throughout their life transition, where this person has been with so many people, had so many relationships, had so many marriages, has so many jobs, right? Because there's a deep hole that they feel that they can't communicate. And so that's where the insecurity is coming from, that allows them to project this false identity out into the world that they have the ability to control. I hope that explained it.
Yeah. So going back a little bit to the data, I mentioned last time, I'm sure you had heard that, you've heard that too, from Dr. Ramani, when she said she estimated 10 to 15% of the population. And I believe you ran across somebody that had even higher number than that. What were some more of the numbers that you've heard as far as the data?
So a part of the problem with the data, right? If you follow me at all, Rais Mujahid on Facebook, and if you follow me at all, what you'll see is that I post a lot of data. And sometimes people be like, that data is old. That data is old. Like, it's 2 years old, it's 4 years old. The process of researching data is very slow, right? And the problem with mental health disorders is they metastasize. And what I mean by metastasize is being a socially transmitted disease, it changes based on getting its needs met. So it could look like Donald Trump today, and then depending on the environment, like if everybody went against Donald Trump, and I mean everybody, then Donald Trump couldn't use the grandiose narcissism that he uses, because it would be ineffective. And so when it's ineffective, when you think about any virus, right? Viruses mutate. Well, narcissism mutates, and it mutates based on what its needs are. And so the problem with the data is always based on, so if I started research today on narcissism, I'm not looking at the mutations that are happening instantly. Like there are, and so this is why, so when people ask, that I've been asked in the past, like, why are you still studying all of this? Well, because it mutates every day. And so it doesn't look the same all the time. And so if you don't have people on the ground who's watching these mutations as they occur, then you will have data that don't reflect the mutations. And so as mutations occur, then you're looking for traditional or classical narcissism, but it's mutated to covert narcissism. Or sometimes narcissism converts to borderline personality disorder. Like it mutates depending on the situation or circumstance. Because what you have to remember is these people don't have an identity. They don't have an identity. And so it's going to morph into whatever it needs to morph to. And depending on what you're studying, that may not be calculated in the data. And that's why I said, although women are less likely to be narcissism, I don't believe that to be the case in the Black community, right? Because it mutates to fit its needs. And so while you may have a lot of narcissistic men, but how we categorize narcissism is going to be based upon, number one, understanding the fundamental principles, right? What you're looking for in a narcissist is the love bomb, the value, discard. And when you see people treat other people in that manner, in that process, that part never changes, right? How they do it may change, but what they're doing doesn't change. And sometimes we miss how they're doing it. And so if it doesn't look like classical narcissism, we don't see it as such. So when you talk about the data, I don't know how often they update the DSM, but it's obviously it's not going to be annual. Like they don't do it annually. So when you're looking at the data, you're looking at the data based on information that may be outdated for the mutations as they occur. That's number one. And number two, I haven't been able to find data that reflect different ways in which narcissism will present itself in different cultures and ethnicities, right? And so when you talk about Muslims, there's a way in which when you talk about immigrant communities, for example, that narcissism may present itself that's cloaked under the veil of a more traditional and classical Islam. And you would miss it, right? Because it looks like Islam, it feels like Islam, everything feels like it's from Allah. But the dominating nature of how their family structures are entailed doesn't make room for the humanity of the people under which they are, the people who are developing underneath those systems. And so you have this way where in those communities, it may be 99% of narcissists are men because they have this more dominating patriarchal structure that has no room for correction. And so the data is always, it's necessary, right? Because it's a starting point of any conversation. Like you can't even start a conversation if you don't know the data. That's why I always say 90% of narcissists are men, because that's what the data say. But I suspect as time goes on and more data comes in and we expand the observation or analysis of the behavior disorder, you'll start to see that it's starting to balance itself out as a result of social changes, right? And being able to identify that, you always have to start with the data that you have, even if you don't have new data available. So, right, when I post data, the data may be from 2014, but the only reason I'm posting data from 2014 is because there is no new data available, right? And so you have to start at. I always say first give the facts, then give your opinion. You always have to start at the facts. And sometimes you just don't have the facts that are available. And most of the times you're not going to do annual research because research costs money and you don't have time to evaluate or research data that isn't going to change. So if the data has been consistent across an extended period of time, it's not cost effective to keep spending money on research that produces the same outcome year in and year out. And so usually when you're looking at the data, that's kind of where you have a problem with the data points, right? Because we don't just have an infinite amount of money where we can just research these ideas continuously. But nevertheless, it's very important to have people always at the forefront. Like somebody has to be looking at how is this metastasizing? How is it morphing? How is it changing? And then that way we can get a better data set if that is occurring.
Let me just see, why is comments not showing up? I got a question that's showing up on my phone. It's not showing up on the screen. My brother asks, is narcissistic activity evolved with Black women now? If so, what are some of the main reasons? Like this, as it evolves in some type of way. If you can understand what he's trying to say.
Yes, I understand. So if you just keep at the forefront of your mind that this is a socially transmitted disease or disorder, a socially transmitted disorder. And what that means is a context has to exist in order to have these people come forth. I told you, narcissism is always the result of parenting. It's always the result of parenting. And so one of the things I talk about on my page all the time, right? Stop hitting Black children. I always tell people, stop hitting Black children. It is dehumanizing. And people make justifications for it, right? And you can see, like I tell people all the time, the data proves it's ineffective, but people have to do it anyway. And that's the imposition of power and authority. And no one has more power and authority over children than mom, right? And so when you think of, I think it was a 1970 film called Mommy Dearest, right? Mommy Dearest is a textbook example of a narcissistic mother, right? That the children are an extension of the mom. Excuse me. So as you have these families break down, then women have unfettered dominance over the children. There is no balance in the family structure. And that's so when you talk about the breakdown of family structures, as families break down, narcissism increases and grows because children's emotional and psychological needs aren't being met as a result of the desperation of the context that exists. And so you need two parents to create this context in which children can have their needs properly met, where there could be a balance. Now, having two parents doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have healthy children being developed, but it is the context under which we get the most healthy children developed. So you can have two toxic people in a relationship and their children's needs still not be met. So you can have a narcissistic father, which is most likely to be the case, and a very empathic mother, right? And so the mother is always trying to meet the needs of the narcissist, but the children get neglected in that process, right? Because the father is dominating over the children. But in this case, you have a situation where fathers are transitory. They come in and out, and the only constant is the mother. So mothers dominating over the children, having this full authority, having this full power, having complete dominance and even support from the structures around them, then there is no balance in their parenting, right? Because they don't get feedback from the children because, I posted a video recently of a mother putting her young adult son out, right? And you can see in the relationship her tyranny. And when things don't go her way, she's trying to assert her dominance. And so it wasn't a relationship of connecting with the son, saying, son, what do you need? What have I missed? Right? Like you rarely hear parents apologizing to their children when they were wrong, right? I'm just a parent and you just should submit to me. And I hate to say this because the intent is not to disparage Black mothers, but this context in which we have, where I quote the data all the time, like 83% of Black children will see their families dissolved by the age of 18, and 67%, 7 out of 10, will see their families dissolved before they are two. Now, I tell people this all the time. Our children's brains develop in the context of the relationship that gave birth to them. And you need, at minimum, the two-parent household together until the child is 7. At minimum until 7, right? Well, we got 70% that aren't making it to 2. And so you can just see already in these structures, these children's brains are not going to develop to the fullest loving and empathetic capacity because the environment itself is deprived. And this is not to blame women, right? Both men and women have to work together to create these structures that are necessary to developing the most optimal, empathetic human beings possible. But that's not what we have. And as these structures break down, then you have mothers who, even if we give them all the government support, we give them Section 8, we give them welfare, we make sure all the basic needs are met. There was research done in Russia in these orphanages where they thought, okay, if we put these children in this orphanage and meet all of their biological needs, everything should be fine. But that's not what happened. a high percentage of those children died before they reached the age of 5. Now they were properly fed. They had, their physical conditions, all of their physical needs were being met, but they weren't attended to with the human connection. And I need you to understand, they died not because of hunger, not because of the climate, right? Everything was controlled. All the physical needs were being met, and they still were dying at a very high rate. They weren't reaching their full maturity, and a very high percentage of them grew up to be like psychopaths because of the lack of the human connection. So I'm saying love is not a optional thing for children. Children need to develop in a loving relationship. They need to feel safe and secure in the love of their parents. And we seem to think that this is optional. Like you can have this co-parenting situation where there is no love. There's no love and connection and empathy between the parents, but somehow we're going to raise empathetic, attuned children. And it's just not how it works. And so what happens is you have all of these women. So remember, I told you it's a socially transmitted disorder. And so you have all of these women with full authority, full dominance, everything. When you talk about, so remember earlier I said that when you get up to CEOs, the highest percentage of narcissists are among CEOs. Just think of it as women as CEOs of the family and culture, right? So you're going to have a higher number of women who are narcissists because it's a socially transmitted disease. You need the context in order to facilitate this disorder, and the context exists in broken families to perpetuate this disorder. I hope I answered the brother's question. I don't see the question either.
I can't see the question. It popped up on my notification, but it's not showing up. They disappeared or something.
Okay. It was a good question, though. I like that question.
Yeah.
Because it holds us accountable to a greater social responsibility. Like there needs to be a social contract that is founded on the principles of love and empathy. So when you think of Prophet Muhammad, like that, you can't find a man who was more attuned and connected to the people around him. And that's just not what we do. It's not what we do with each other as husband and wife. It's not what we do with each other as parishioners of our religious communities, right? There's a way in which we're always trying to talk about rights and responsibility or the legal codes. And the reality is, if there is no love and empathy that we have between each other, then the idea of having of creating empathic human beings it's just not going to happen because the context doesn't exist for it. And what you have to understand is people are trying to survive, and the environment tells them how to survive. And so we don't want people trying to survive. We want people to thrive, and love produces thriving human beings.
So I was thinking about a statement that Imam Amin was talking. He was in his own this morning, relating from his teachers about love. When you brought up love and the hadith that a person will be with the one who they love. Like if we truly love the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, we love the Sahaba, we love the righteous, that we will be with them. And what we're seeing here makes it hard for a child in that environment to connect with any type of real love to begin with. So the barriers to implementing Islam, are there, and they're hard for somebody to get around.
Well, so we're not androids, right? We're not computers, right? So a lot of the time what you see, particularly as it pertains to Muslims, and I'm sure this is the case with other religious communities as well, a lot of times what you see in the rules and regulations and the guidelines is the structure that is being created, but the essence of our being is left out. The essence of our being. And so oftentimes I hear people talk about the life example of the Prophet, prayers and peace be upon him, they're missing the connectedness, right? So you never hear like it's the sunnah to be connected, right? The people are telling you what to do. They are not telling you how to be. And Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was how to be a human, right? How to connect with other people. And so one of the things that children learn in these environments that have the structure but are absent of love is that love. Okay, I can't be a loving human being around a bunch of lions, right? So, I may come into an environment with love and empathy, but if I come into an environment with love and empathy with a bunch of lions, they're going to eat me alive. And so what I learned in that process then is that then I have to be a lion too, right? And so now we're not facilitating love because there is no context for love, right? So I always tell people the context for love is virtue. The context for love is virtue. And so when you understand compassion and kindness and integrity and dignity and honor, right? All of these things, when we understand like who is Muhammad, praise and peace be upon him, who is he? He embodies, like you're talking about, let's set Islam aside for a second. And we have to set Islam aside for a second because he wasn't born a prophet, right? He didn't become a prophet until he was 40. So who was this man before he was a prophet, right? He was known as El Amin, the trustworthy, right? A virtue. Trustworthiness is a virtue, right? So you cannot facilitate love without trust. You cannot facilitate love without integrity, right? So these are the things that he were pre-Islam, right? Where people trusted him. You could give your stuff to him and get it back in the same as you gave it to him or better on return before there were any Islamic guidelines. And so the question is, who are we, right? There is Islam that gives us this structure, but who are we? Who am I? How much self-reflection, right? Before revelation, he was known to just go up in the mountains and just spend time meditating. Having himself be open to having the revelation come to him from Allah, right? He had to be open to that. He had to be contextualized. So when you see who he was as a human being, then you start to understand like, oh, okay, that's who we need to be before we describe what we need to do. And I often communicate this to people. When you learn about Islam, you learn that the Quran was not given to us all at once. And so you had people who were better Muslims than us without having all of the Quran and this whole structure of hadith and this whole, like there's a history and legacy of tradition and teaching. No, they didn't have all of that. And still they were better Muslims than us. Why? Because they were better people than us. They connected with each other in a human way that made Islam absorbable for them, right? So as scripture came, we know Islam, but we reject Islam. The question is, why are we rejecting Islam? Well, Allah tells us in the Quran, like no matter how much teaching you give these people, they have a hard heart. And if you have a hard heart, even your practice of Islam is going to be brutal and dictatorial and this kind of like always smashing and trying to control and dominate. Well, that's not loving, right? And so there's a way in which we have this structure. We have to have this regard for the structure because we see what happens in societies and communities where you have no structure, right? It's just complete chaos and oppression and tyranny, if you will. But also the structure without love produces the same results. We just don't see it that way. And so the absence of love, right? So the Christians have love and no structure. Muslims have structure, no love. And so that's one of the things that we need to be more focused on is making sure that we are communicating in our teachings of Islam, that loving part of Muhammad, that empathetic part of Muhammad, right? Like how he engaged the children, how he engaged the women, like women never felt dominated by him. And like, how is that the case? How is it that we feel we have to dominate women in most parts of the world? Obviously, that's not the case for us as African Americans. We don't dominate anything. And that has to be pointed out, right? That you have these cultures, and then you have Islam, and Islam is trying to impose itself on these cultures. But the cultural practice seep through. And so when you look at different communities, you have to factor in what knowledge do we have of their cultural practices. That's going to determine how we are teaching Islam based on the needs of those people in that culture. And so in our context, we have this matriarchal structure, right? As a result of our women dominating our culture and community. And so it doesn't, there's no balance, right? And that's the key. The key is the balance. And so when you talk about women being narcissists, that's a part of it. They say power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And women have the power because of the way that the system is designed. Women are powerful. And it goes both ways. It's not that women are corrupt. It's just that they have the power, and wherever the power is where you're going to find the most corruption. And always that corruption is a result of usually some narcissistic behaviors. And let me just, when I always try to make the Islamic connection. So when Allah created Adam, and he told the angels, look at this creation, right? I'm just paraphrasing. Look at this creation. And it was Iblis who said, I'm better than them. like, why are you giving them dominion over the creation, and I'm better than them? And that is the first practice of narcissism, right? That I'm better than them, right? And so you can see that there's a satanic characteristic of narcissism, that if we are not mindful of how it's playing itself out, you can have narcissistic leaders, narcissistic communities that are covered by the veil of Islam, right? In the Quran, it says that the religion goes no further than their throat. Like, they can recite the Quran, they can recite the teachings of Islam, but it's just the sounds coming from their mouth. In the heart, it hasn't penetrated. And what that means is, and the goal is not to control people. I always tell people, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just giving you the facts. And that was right. In the Quran, Allah says he's just a messenger, meaning this is just a message. You are responsible for how you practice it, and he is the example of how it should be practiced.
Okay. And I was thinking about some added context. You familiar with the Bobby Wright clip, Dr. Bobby Wright clip, where he talked about how he said nobody talks about the 70s. We know about the 60s. Nobody talks about the 70s. He said in the 70s, they saw the power of the Black Power struggle of the 60s, and those white women, they regrouped, they rallied around their men. And that's when they went after our women and convinced them that they could be above the black men, the black children, and be at the top of the black community. And they got our women that way in the 70s with the feminist movement. So if you want to speak to that, that's...
Okay, so to frame that in the context of narcissism, there was a movie. If you watch movies, you'll know, with Denzel Washington. I think it was called Fallen. And in this movie, the spirit, there was an evil spirit that existed, but it can only exist outside of the human for so long before it just dissipated into air. And so, but it transmitted through human contact. So if I bumped into you, then the spirit could jump from you to me. And so what happens is there's a spirit, I don't know if I would call it a jinn, but there's a spirit that can jump from person to person and people to people, right? But it always happens through some type of human connection. And so what you see, if you look at these things from an evolutionary process, like how did we get to this point now where women are dominating men? Well, women spent the vast majority of human existence under the domination of men, right? So now it's like, all right, we dominated them for all these years. Well, now it's their turn. And so what you see is there's a transmission of that spirit, right? Where nobody, whoever's in power isn't looking for balance. Like, people who have power don't look for balance. Like, how do I share this power? No, in the power grab, there's always a way which we're trying to hold on to the power that we have. And so what you see then is, particularly as it pertains to white women, right? In this patriarchal structure under white supremacy, is white women feeling dominated. And it's interesting. It's interesting when you look at this thing from a historic perspective. So white men dominated, and then there was the potential for black men to have freedom. But they, in order, because we live in this democracy, right? So if the black man is going to get the right to vote and women don't have the right, because understand this for black people, there was never a point in our history where we were saying men should vote, but women should not. So that's not our history. That's white people's history, where men voted and women didn't. That when we sought the right to vote, it was for all of us. It wasn't like black men should be able to vote. But what happened with white people is they really didn't want white women to vote. But they were like, well, if black people are going to vote, then we need more votes. And what's the best way to get more votes? Well, easy. Give the right to white women to vote. So giving women the right to vote was white supremacy, right? It had nothing to do with giving women the right to vote. It was, how do we maintain our position as white supremacists? Well, we maintain our position as white supremacists by doubling our vote count, right? If you have this half of your population can't vote and you still want to dominate politics, then you give those that half that don't have the right to vote, you give them the right to vote, and now they still dominate that minority group, because that minority group is protesting for every one of us, men and women, to get the right to vote. And so what white women did then is superimpose their cultural experience into our women. And they pulled black women in to support them, telling black women, black men are just like white men. Except that's never been the case. There's never been any evidence to support that. But when there's a power grab, power grabs always make people look like, oh, there's power, I want some of that. And that's what black women have looked at. And so the structure said, hey, black women, we can give you power at least over black men. And that's an enticing offer when it's white supremacy giving it to you, right? Because those white people look powerful, and I want to be powerful. And so that's what happened. And for me, so when I talk about evaluating, like, number one, black people don't know about narcissism. And I know they don't know about narcissism because I didn't know about narcissism. Like, I lived 40 years of my life and nobody ever taught me about narcissism. I never heard a conversation about narcissism. I don't see a nuanced perspective amongst black people about narcissism. So I get it. So everything I've learned has come from outside of our particular community, and especially outside of the African American Muslim community, right? There are no specialists in narcissism. So you're not going to learn about narcissism for black people because that knowledge is just not in our circles, which is why I'm here, right? Because I've done all of this research. I continue to do this research. And understand, I express to people, I am not a professional. So don't simply quote me. I'm telling you what I learned from the professionals. I'm not the professional. So if you need help in dealing with this, make sure you seek professional help. I should have probably said that in the beginning, but just to clarify that, right? Always go seek professional help, and understand that all professional help isn't qualified or properly trained in narcissism. So you can go to a therapist, you can go to a psychologist, and they may not have the appropriate training in narcissism, because remember I told you that it metastasizes. So they may have learned a classical understanding of narcissism from 20 years ago and had done no research or study whatsoever. So you can have a person who is a professional, right? I've seen black people in certain contexts talking about narcissism that didn't know what they were talking about. Like, how can you talk about narcissism and not tell people about love bomb, devalue, discard? Like, that's where you start. And I've seen like 2-hour conversations with a therapist talking about narcissism that did not even talk about the basic structure of narcissism. And so I'm trying to communicate to people, right? I do all of this research, and then I try to figure out ways to communicate to people how to observe this behavior so that so that you don't have to be a professional, right? The objective is not to diagnose anyone. The objective is to be able to recognize the patterns of behavior, because narcissists all follow, like, they're so predictable, but you have to know what it is you're predicting. And that's my goal, to bring awareness to people, to look into the field, to find people like Dr. Ramani, because she's seasoned in this field. She trains therapists on narcissism. Because therapists oftentimes don't. You can spend years. This one woman said she was going to a therapist for 15 years, and then after her and her husband separated, she went to a different narcissist, and within 15 minutes of the first session, the therapist told her, "Oh, that's narcissistic abuse." Well, what was this person who was giving her therapy for 15 years looking at? And that's what I'm saying. So you can have professionals not know what they're talking about. And if you don't know what narcissism is, if you don't know the intricate details of this particular cluster B personality disorder, you can have a person who's a professional. And what we do is we look at the title and say, like, oh, well, that person is a clinical psychologist. But it doesn't mean that they're trained. Like, you have to be trained. And part of the reason why is, understand, in the academy, the study of narcissism is very premature, right? I think they said you may spend a week on narcissism. There's no way you're going to learn everything you need to learn about narcissism in a week, right? So just because a person is trained doesn't mean that they know what they're talking about. And I'm not telling you like I'm the master of narcissism. No, I just study all of these people. And that's where my focus has been the last several years. I've always known Donald Trump was a narcissist. I just didn't know the intricate details and nuances of narcissistic abuse until I had my own personal experience that made me become vividly aware of the impact. And I think we need to address that as well. Like, what is the impact when we talk about our families and communities? What's the actual impact? Because that's going to be the shocking part.
Okay. One thing before going into the next term, I had read an article when you talk about if you do talk about the data, and people, a lot of people still think 1%. You mean they even think even much lower than what they actually report. Because a lot of us are just now learning about narcissism. So it's like, is it even significant to talk about? And even this week, seeing different people talking, intelligent people talking about, is it even important to talk about, sort of minimizing the importance of it? Obviously we believe it could be it's very dangerous, but there was one article talking about like the range, like you talk about the data, but then also the range, like one narcissist, he can have a range of 5 intimate people that he damages, so it's going to widen out the data, like that 10%, could affect 30% of the population or something like that,
Well, if you think about, the first thing is, it's complicated. So we don't diagnose children, for example. We don't diagnose children. And a part of it is because children are developing, that they're in the development stage. But there is a point where we're developing on an incline, we're going up, and then we plateau. And so the plateau is where you would test. But we don't test. And that's why the data is hard to really calculate, because it's not like all of us got tested to see where we were at on the scale of narcissism. And narcissists don't think that there's anything wrong with them. Like, that's part of why it's impossible to treat, because the person you're trying to treat don't think anything's wrong with them. So why would they seek treatment? There's nothing wrong with me. And so that's part of the problem. When you talk about the data is telling you about the people who were tested. So like the coronavirus, for example, we talk about how many people have the coronavirus, but that's based on only the people we've tested. Like, what percentage of the population has taken the test? So if you don't test everybody, how do you know how many people actually have it? So all you can report are the people who have been tested. And so that's what, so So I'm saying, we know with the coronavirus that there are more people who have it than have been tested for it. And so narcissism is going to be the same thing. We know more people have it than who have been tested for it. So that's why the data is always difficult. But nevertheless, the data gives us an axiom. It gives us a starting point for the conversation. It gives us a starting point. And so you have, on one hand, Dr. Rahmani, who trains professionals on narcissism, saying, this is the epidemic of our time. And a part of like what you said, if the narcissist damages people, and damaged people convert to narcissism, if you will. And so the more people they damage, the more people they will convert. But because we don't test, it's not like we look at the narcissist like we do COVID. When you test positive for COVID, you have to tell everybody you was around, like, hey, I tested positive for COVID and you should probably go get tested. But we don't do that with narcissism. We don't say, like, hey, you've suffered from narcissistic abuse. Maybe you should tell the people around you that you suffer from narcissistic abuse from this person, so we can find out how many people that person has actually damaged, particularly as it pertains to children, right? If children are being raised by a narcissist, there's a very high chance that they're going to be narcissists, because you adapt to the dominance of the narcissistic culture in order to survive, right? So you see in these situations, in the Me Too movement, where one woman gains the courage to speak out against a narcissist. All sexual predators are narcissists. Just be mindful of that. They don't have respect for boundaries, and they think that whatever they want from you, they should get, and they don't care how it impacts for you. So all sexual predators are narcissists. But what we don't look at is, okay, what then is the impact of all of the victims? And so you start seeing, like, whoa, like one person comes out and then you find out this person has 50 victims, 100 victims. Well, a percentage of those victims are going to change and adapt to the reality of the lion. Remember, I said, like, if you go amongst lions with love and the lion attack you, well, I can't do that anymore. And so now you become a lion, or at least adapt the characteristics of the lion in order to survive amongst lions. And so we don't know what the impact of the narcissist is. We just know that with each generation, there are more and more people testing positive for MPD. So we know it's growing. We just don't know the degree to which what. But man, when you look at how family structures fall apart, like, all the evidence is there that there are a lot more narcissists out there than the data shows. But the data is the starting point, and we can't say what it actually is until we get data that supports what it is. We just know, just looking at the context, like, you get a sense of, oh, okay, there's a lot of narcissists out there, because I'm having narcissistic experiences almost everywhere I go, whether it's on the job, whether it's in the religious community, whether it's in your intimate relationships. That's why relationships are connecting and breaking, right? Because there's a level of self-centeredness in our relationship structures that reveal to us that there's a problem in the cultural context itself.
Okay. Let's get into some of these terms. Let's talk about the validation and gaslighting, and then the difference and overlap.
So, because when you talk about validation, the term that is often used is narcissistic supply. That's what narcissists are looking for. They're looking for validation. Like, they need constant validation. And so what they've learned, remember I told you, like, in childhood, they learn that their needs aren't going to get met from their primary caregiver. They have these emotional and psychological needs that aren't being met from the caregiver. So they create an alternative identity where their needs are getting met. But in order to sustain that identity, they have to always bring in new validation, right? Because validation gets old. Like if I tell you you're beautiful, if I tell you you're beautiful every day, at some point it just loses its fervor, right? You need a new person to tell you you're beautiful, because that is there's.
I mean, invalidation and gaslighting.
Oh, okay. So but it's connected though.
Yeah.
Because the need is for them to get validation.
Mm-hmm.
But what that means is they'll do anything to anybody in order to get validation, which inherently invalidates everybody around them. And I mean everybody. You may not be invalidated yet, but your time is coming. Your time is coming. And this is why they go through so many people. And so when you talk about, let's say, white supremacy, for example, white supremacy is a constant need for validation. But in order for them to be constantly validated, there's a group of people who have to be constantly invalidated. And so in order to invalidate them, that's where the gaslighting comes in, right? The gaslighting serves the purpose to invalidate you so they can validate themselves. So you hear people say all the time, you don't have to blow out somebody else's candle in order for you to shine. But that's not what the narcissist thinks. The narcissist the narcissist doesn't mind. See, the goal is for you and I to validate each other. That's the goal, for you and I to validate each other. That's what they call the win-win. The narcissist will take that if they have to. But the narcissist is always trying to win. Always trying to win. And if they can't get the win-win, then you have to lose. And so in order for them to feel good about themselves, the gaslighting is designed to turn you into the loser. To turn you into the loser. So I have to create, I said they bend reality. I create a context in which you are the loser because that makes me feel good about myself, right? And so just like you have, remember I told you, wherever you have a power discrepancy, so whether it's white supremacy, so whether it's feminism and masculinity, wherever you have a power discrepancy, the goal is to retain power. And that's what narcissists want. Narcissists want power because then they can control supply. If they dominate over you, they get to determine who they get validation from. And so you can just see it. When you talk about our community context, you can see how Black men are often invalidated. Our experiences don't count. Our experiences aren't real. And so our experiences have to always validate Black women. And so in that, right, there's not a validation of each other. It's like Black women always have to win. They always have to win. Even when they lose, everybody comes out to frame the losing as them winning. And so the finger is always going to be pointed. You are always going to be what they call the scapegoat. The scapegoat is the one that everybody blames for the problem. Everything will be good if you just did this, if you just did that. And your humanity is minimalized and trivialized. So you become dehumanized in the process of them getting validation. Right. So no matter what happens. So one woman said to me, your ex did this. You must have done something. Like, how could you say that? Like, how could you say that without even knowing any of the story? Well, the objective is to make sure that a narrative exists where she, the woman who's saying that to me, where I had to do something, still retains power over me, even if I do that. So they have a victim narrative that they're using to invalidate our experience, as if men don't get abused, right? Listen, and I've said this before, there's a way where our ego as men is being used against us, being weaponized against us, right? So that we are always to accept that we are the abusers. Even when we're abused, we are the abusers. And I'm saying, like, that's not a human experience. The human experience has a range to, again, from victim on one side to abuser on the other, right? To predator and prey. And men can be prey of abusive women. But the way it's categorized, so when you talk about gaslighting, there's a massive cultural gaslighting of men in general, right? Where men are always the predators, even when they're the victims of psychological abuse. And so sometimes you see men, it's what they call reactive abuse, where women are doing things. They're pushing at you, they're tugging you, they're doing this. And then when you finally react, now you're the abuser. But no one evaluates the nature of the actual relationship, right? And so the things that she was doing to you to trigger you, if you did to her, everybody would see them. But because of the dynamic of the culture, and because the way in which there's a feminine dominance of the culture, what they call gynocentrism, right? Then women get to control the narrative. And so the narrative out there is the one that is designed to specifically gaslight men. And because Black men are at the bottom of the dominance hierarchy, we get gaslighted the most, and by everybody, including Black men. And this is, I'm saying this to you because I don't want people to think like I'm bashing women. Like, no, I'm giving you the reality of the circumstances, and we can change that. Men and women can work together to make sure that there is a power balance, right? I'll say this, the objective, the reason you need a power balance is because we need to be able to check each other, right? You and I were Muslim. I always assume, even though the Muslims are our target market, because last week somebody said we don't teach from the Bible. That's not the point. The point is to contextualize the conversation in a way where I am speaking directly to Muslims, right? But if you're not a Muslim, you can get something from this conversation as well. So that's why I categorize it that way. Not because I'm trying to teach Muslims Christianity, but I'm trying to contextualize it at a greater scheme. But the point that I'm trying to make is, in the Quran, Allah says He uses one people to check another, right? So sometimes Muslims have moved to the tyrannical side of the bell curve, right? And so sometimes Christians are going to have to come in and check us to be able to balance us out, right? So sometimes Muslims check Christians, sometimes Christians check Muslims, sometimes, like there's always a way where we're of the Abrahamic faith. And sometimes another community, maybe the Jews over here, they're doing it right. And so I go over there where the Jews at and be like, oh, they're getting the results we want. What are they doing? So I look at that. And I'm saying, whenever there's a power imbalance, there needs to be somebody who comes in and say, there's an imbalance here. And what I'm saying now, it's not that women are inherently corrupt or that men are inherently corrupt. We all have this capacity for love. And that should be where we start in this conversation, is love. And then that way, when we talk about, okay, women are dominating men, how do we balance out this power? So that's why you hear me talk about divine masculinity. You always hear me talk about divine masculinity. The reason is because I do want men to grab their power back, but not in a way where we're trying to get back at women, because that's what women are doing, right? Women are using the power they have to get back at men, and that needs to stop. And so men and women need to come together to make sure that there is a balance of power. And right now, that is not the case, right? I hear men say all the day, I had to ask my wife to allow me to be a father. Like, allow you to be a father? Like, what are you talking about? And so that's why when I talk about the family structure, right, and moving away from this idea of divorce, right, there are going to be some situations under which divorce is necessary, but divorce should always be the last resort. And so we should always be working together to try to develop people to maximize their potential, starting with the husband and wife working together to maximize their potential. And then we don't have to have this power grab, right? Because the basis of the relationship is love. And then we don't have people trying to dominate, men trying to dominate women, women trying to dominate men. Listen, we're paying for masculine domination. We're paying for it, right? This is the payment for years of us being in power and dominating women. And so women learn. All right, when I get my turn, watch what's going to happen. And I'm saying there's nothing about that that's loving on either side, right? But unfortunately, people don't give up power. So men have to fight back against the power structure in which women are dominating, not to dominate women, but just to balance things out properly. So when you hear me talking about these subjects as women are dominating men, how black men are at the bottom of the hierarchy, and so everybody is dominating the black man. Everybody is dominating the black man. And I'm saying, as such, it kind of puts black men in a unique position, because we and only we have the power, right? Because there's a divine masculinity in us to set things aright. And for us being Muslim, understanding our divine role from Allah, right? That you saw this with the Prophet himself, praise and peace be upon him, where women were being dominated. But he didn't come in to dominate women, and he didn't come in to give women the right to dominate men. He just empowered women to a degree where there's a balance between us and them, where you get the most optimal family structures and the most optimal manufacturing of human beings.
Right, because most people get confused and think that Islam legislated something like polygyny when polygyny was already going on. When Islam, Prophet ﷺ came with limited the number of wives that men could have. Some had like 10 wives and stuff, you mean, like that. So it didn't come to impose anything on women that would be hard, and it came to make things easier for women. Yeah.
Right.
And what you were saying about the checking, that's one of the sunnahs of Allah. You mean, where it says in the Quran, you mean, what can be translated as if you not check one people by means of another, it will be corruption on the earth. You mean?
Right.
Times where Muslims, even when we established the empire, when Islam spread out and stuff, you mean, there were times when they had to be checked and stuff, you mean, when too much worldly concerns dominated our affairs and stuff. And that brings really getting to the heart of this. I want to talk about how Dr. T. Hassan Justin, he gave you the opportunity to speak, to have a place, to have a platform to speak that you didn't have within the Black Muslim community. You mean?
Right.
And so when you talk about the Christians, sometimes they have to check. That's the way of on a small level of checking us. Like, hey, why does he have to be the one to do it? We appreciate it, but it should be a context. It should be a space for within the Black Muslim community where that conversation should be able to have taken place, where you can speak freely, you know. And that's one of the main reasons why I had this. You mean, respect women and everything like this, but this is specifically a space for Black Muslim men to have their space. You mean, I was talking to one of my brothers the other day, and he was talking about an older guy from the older generation, talking about how it used to be a space for Black men to talk to each other. You mean, that is not really there anymore. You know, so yeah. Appreciate Dr. T. Hassan just for that.
Absolutely.
So with that, because you went through a very personal situation, and you at one point, for a small period, you were staying in your car, right?
Yes, I was. I mean, the way the system is set up, like I said, like we're dominated, and sometimes our ego won't allow us to accept that we're dominated, right? Because you have to be a man no matter what, and so people hide, particularly men. Like when you are the dominated, when you talk about gaslighting, the way gaslighting works is I gaslight you, and then there's a point where I don't even have to gaslight you anymore. You'll gaslight yourself on my behalf. And so what people do is they hide the abuse. Black men hide the abuse. They're afraid to speak of it because publicly, like I posted my personal situation on social media, and the number of women who didn't even know me that came out to rip me to shreds. They didn't even know me, right? They don't know me. They don't know my capacity. They don't know anything about me. It was just an attack. And so what men learned, and when you talk about having a space, is you should just take abuse. And so one of the things I understood is, because a lot of people will say to you, hey man, you shouldn't be posting this on social media. You shouldn't be, saying this or doing that. But like I told you, man, I've done the research. I've seen how these things work. I've seen how they worked over time. I evaluated the processes over time, not just my personal situation. Like, listen, I give my personal experience in order to teach other people like what was happening in the process. And so what happened was I had all these people publicly who were telling me, don't talk about your personal experience publicly. That's private. That's the
Gaslighting.
mother of your, like, people are like just straight up gaslighting, right? Minimizing, trying to push down, right? I'll give you an example. Like, a lot of people hit their kids, but one of the things you rarely see is people showing you they're hitting their children, right? When people are showing you they're hitting their children, it's an indication how low the culture is. But at least there's some hiding of it. So I'm saying there's a way in which you, as a black man, because black women do that all the time, talk about their experience, talk about their abuse, how somebody abused them. Like, they get to openly express what they are experiencing, right?
We were on the show, the Dope Muslim Women's Podcast. One sister was able to openly talk about a narcissistic marriage that she was in.
Right.
So
But you as a man,
why can't we do that here?
right? Right. There's no space for you to do that over there, and unfortunately, it puts us in a position to where we can't get the help that we need. So by me expressing my personal experience, and I mean every detail of it, I expressed, right? Because I wanted people to see, right? Think about this. Under white supremacy, how did the civil rights movement work? How did it work? How did we gain some semblance of power back? Well, we had to expose the people who were abusing us, because their abuse, while contextualized and publicly known, hadn't been, like, it's like, all right, we're not going to get any support in this environment. We need to figure out a way to show the world what these people are doing. And I'm saying, if black men are experiencing abuse, we need to be able to show the world that we are experiencing abuse. And so when you show the world that you're not in legitimate abuse, not like, oh, I'm the victim. Like, no, not that. Listen, you're a man. As a man, you have the capacity to love. And loving someone means you're open to them. You are open to them because you're vulnerable to them. And vulnerability is a place, it's interesting, right? Because the more vulnerable you can be at somebody, the more lowly you are in the context of that person, but the more power that you draw from the root of that vulnerability for your relationship. But simultaneously, it positions you to be taken advantage of in a way that you will lose control. And so what happens is, you love this person and you don't understand why they're doing this to you. Like, why is this person hurting you? Like, you're trying to love them more and more, and it opens you up to a level of destruction that oftentimes you're not even aware that's happening, because it's so insidious. It happens over a slow period of time until one day the abuse just boom turns up full speed. And so that's what you had happen. And when you evaluate people's history, you'll find that this is the pattern of behavior that they have in all of their relationships. Whether you're a man or a woman, these people just go through life destroying people. And the only way you can do that, if the person that you're destroying is open to love, right? That's why narcissists seek out empath. Empaths are seeking out narcissists because they want to love somebody, and nobody needs more love than a narcissist, except that love goes into a black hole, never to be seen again. But on the other side, you have narcissists who are looking for that supply for as long as that supply is useful to them, until they throw you out and then bring in somebody else to start the new supply. And so it is important for black men to be able to do two things. To be able to say that, yes, I am a man, but I'm also human. And I can be hurt, and I can cry, and I can scream out and yell out without losing my masculinity, right? I don't lose my masculinity. I'm just as manly as I was before I publicly expressed what I was experiencing. That was a low point for me. I am entitled as a human being to have a low point. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had low points, right? There was a time for the prophet when he had the most difficulty in the movement. It's called, I'm looking up the Arabic term here. now I can't find it. Anyway, there was a time that categorized the year of sadness when Khadijah had passed, his uncle had passed. He had the situation at Taif. That Taif situation, he said, like, of everything he experienced, like, that was the most traumatic experience he had. I mean, they threw stones and bricks at him, and they said as he was leaving the city to escape the abuse, he had passed out and woke up to see, like, his shoes were full of blood. And, like, he was like, why would they do this? And that's what I mean by you can't go to lions with love. Right. So he had to remove himself from that situation in order to evaluate, okay, I just have to separate myself from them. And then after time, you saw that those people became some of the best Muslims. Sorry about that.
No problem.
And so that's what you have when you talk about the context that we need. We need a context to be able to express ourselves. I would caution us. I caution us to stop the pendulum, right? Stop the pendulum from swinging from left to right. And if it's too far from the left, only exert enough force that pushes it back to the middle. We're not trying to push it back to the other side. And oftentimes in our expression as men, that's what you see. And so you'll hear me saying stuff like the objective is not to bash women, and understand that the focus of the pushback is to center in a place where love can evolve. And so that's the objective always, is to get us back to a place of love, not to say that men need to get back on top and we need to dominate and we need to treat women like that. No, man, that's toxic. And I'm not trying to push a toxic narrative, but I am trying to say, understand that we as men find ourselves in a toxic narrative where we need to push back to a healthy medium. Yeah. And spaces like this do that for us.
You got all these popular gaslighting terms. Now you got gaslighting, invalidating memes. Was the one that was popular last year was a woman naturally submits to a real man, and a lot of people passing up. I was okay, but what I saw in it was some invalidation, some gaslighting, that was built into there, because it's like, if she's not submitting, you're the problem. But she naturally submits to a real man.
Right. And so what you see, I mean, once you understand narcissistic abuse, right? And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to educate people on what narcissistic abuse. It becomes shocking how easy it is to, like, see when it's happening, right? It's like it's happening, like, oh, you're gaslighting me. I think on one post on Facebook, there was a man who was like I had posted a post that I didn't post the facts in the post, but if you follow my page, I post facts all the time, right? And then I give commentary on different statuses to kind of break it down in piece by piece, right? So I'm not going to post the data in every step. And so he came on the post saying, like, well, once you get over your personal experience, you'll have a better understanding of this. Like, wait a minute, this post wasn't about my personal experience. So why did you even bring that up, right? It was an attempt for him to invalidate what I was saying, because he didn't like it. He didn't like how it made him feel. And so how do I minimize what this man is trying to say in this post? Well, the easiest way to do it is what you call ad hominem attack, meaning I'm going to attack the person, not the subject itself. So he's using that ad hominem fallacy in order to minimize the actual subject matter, so that whatever his ideology is can continue to dominate and be practiced in the way that it is. And so what he's doing is gaslighting himself on the behalf of women by gaslighting me, right? And this is what I said. The only reason I pointed out, and I told him, I gave a response, and at the end of the response, I said, and I'm starting to feel like you're gaslighting me, right? Now, normally you wouldn't say that to a narcissist because they'll just flip it back on you. But the reason I pointed it out is because I wanted it to be clear to everybody. Like when you saw the conversation, you like that's the interesting thing about social media is like the conversation is right there. Like you can see it and the person can't deny it. And so I've had people come on my page and try to gaslight me. And I always point out, not for them. They're not going to get it, right? Anybody who's gaslighting you, they will never get it. I never had a person where I said, you gaslighting me, bro. And he was like, oh, yeah, that is what I'm doing. I'm sorry. No, that's not what they do. So for me, the point of pointing out the gaslighting, because it's a public conversation, is to show people who are empathic enough, look, this is what you see. Like this is gaslighting, and I'm allowing the opportunity for people to be able to learn what this behavior is in real time, and so that you can see it as it happens to me on my page, and be able to make connections in other venues where you are operating, so that you can see, oh, that behavior that one brother was talking about, right? And so that's the objective of me pointing out. Normally, I wouldn't tell somebody they was gaslighting me. Like soon as people gaslighting me, just shut down the conversation. That's going nowhere. But in a public forum, I'm trying to educate people and try to make sure that they understand. Because you had liked the comments. So I saw you like the comments. So when I told them like, yeah, bro, you just gaslighted me. There was no reason to bring up my personal experience. And you brought it up anyway, right? And you brought it up specifically to invalidate what I was saying. And why would you invalidate what I was saying? Like, what's the point of that? There's only one reason to do that, right? And understand that I was open enough to share my personal experience with the public, and what it showed me is who's going to use now my personal experience as a tool and weaponize it against me. And unfortunately for you, it's just not going to work over here, because I know what's happening. I'm going to call out what's happening in order to show other people what's happening.
So you knew that from doing the research, you knew that and you're identifying your ex-wife as being a narcissist in your beliefs, that it was going to come back on you. You mean?
Oh, so most professionals will tell you, do not fight the narcissist. They will tell you that, do not fight the narcissist. They say you cannot win. You can't win. And you can't win because most people will break and fold under the pushback, because the pushback is going to be fierce. And so what they just tell you is to just go no contact. Don't feed into it. Don't give them a response. Avoid talking about it on social media. Now, the thing for me is,
you wouldn't have been able to educate us if you were silent.
Now, it cost me a lot. I cannot lie to you. It is mentally draining. It takes a lot from you, because remember, most professionals tell you, number one, they're telling you don't fight this because you're just not equipped to do it. Like, you're not equipped to do it. You don't have the knowledge base. These people are master manipulators. They are master manipulators. But there are two things. I come from ADOS, right? American Descendants of Slavery. I come from ADOS, and we have a rich history of fighting back. So giving up is not what we do. Surrendering is not what we do. And then add to that, I converted to Islam. And when I check the history of Islam, I ain't seen no back down. Muslims have fought battles where they were outnumbered 3-1, right? So, and my name is Mujahid, right? That's my name, Mujahid, right? And so this is psychological warfare. And my life experience as a DOS and Muslim has equipped me with a basis, a fundamental basis to be able to be Khalifa. I'm not saying I'm the Khalifa. I'm saying the essence of Khalifa, right? The governor of affairs. And as such, not backing down, right? But at the same time, I always try to say this, I'm still human. And a part of this is people come at me, people attack me. They're going to try to gaslight me. Like they're going to send the flying monkeys. All of this is going to happen. I know it's going to happen. And so I am grateful to have people like yourself who throughout this whole process have been in my corner and on my side. So, and I'm grateful for that. I'm sorry. I'm grateful for that because I have chosen to take on this battle, and I haven't had to do it alone. And I've gotten the validation from the people that I needed that validation from to move forward. Because there were days where we're like the prophet, like it's like, man, Allah, have you left me? And you know, Allah revealed to him, we have not left you. The same with Abraham, you know, when he needed validation from Allah, you know, and Allah like, have you doubted me? He's like, no, I haven't doubted you. But I'm saying the validation for righteousness is just as necessary for the validation of evil, right? Evil is always validated. That's why these people come out in droves to defend and protect evil. And so good people have to recognize when they're dealing with, I don't want to, the mujahideen, right? The true mujahideen, the people who are fighting for that loving context, not the people who are fighting for power in order to dominate. I'm never perpetuating that. Never. I'm not perpetuating for anybody to dominate somebody else. I am perpetuating the idea that the Christians have a saying, God is love. You know, one of the attributes of God is love. And because it's an attribute of God, it deserves a fierce defense. And so I made the decision that no matter what it cost me, I was going to fight this battle. And I trusted in Allah that he would send me the people that I need to give me the support that I needed in order to call this stuff out and simultaneously help people to understand the type of environment that we need to push back against the force that is satanic. It's a satanic force.
Mm-hmm. And it was a struggle. I know for myself and probably others to be supporting you, because sometimes it's easy to get pulled in based on you get pulled in to that invalidation of each other based on different things that we might be experiencing that we haven't recognized, and you know that we might be what's the we're gaslighting ourselves. But I'm trying to look at the we got the cognitive dissonance going on maybe in our own situations, you mean, that cause us to put it out on somebody else. You mean, and it's easy to just project it onto another black man. And so it was a struggle, you mean, but you were consistent in the information and everything like that, you mean, and making an intellectual argument and everything that, okay, like I gotta support this brother on this, you know what I mean? This is right, no matter who's gonna be upset, you mean, or against me supporting them, you mean. Truth is truth, you know. And I know for you it got so bad that like by coming out, you mean, and taking up that Mujahid fight, that Flying Monkeys was on you crazy. You lost people that was close to you, that might have been close to you on different levels, you mean, that they went to, and they're talking about you, he's such and such, you mean, and so bad that, you mean, because of how everything happened and escalated so quickly for you, that you ended up on the suicide watch, right? And people were still minimizing your situation even then, you mean. I'm like, I think that's one of the craziest and most dangerous things, is that to minimize the onslaught and the rage and all that of somebody that's a narcissist. You got to minimize the pain of the victim, you mean.
Yes. And you see that across the board, right? In whatever case where you have a person who is victimized, there are people who minimize the victimization, right? Only women get to use the victim shaming excuse. We don't get to use that. We don't get to use that for ourselves. And sometimes men as victim, not sometimes, right? That's the overarching thing, is that men can't be victims. And so in order to do that, you have to shame the victim themselves. And that could have a tremendous psychological impact on somebody, right? And I had people telling me, like, obviously questioning my sanity. Now, prior to the situation, nobody ever questioned my sanity, right? I never had a problem with my sanity. And a part of me, when I talk about the mental health struggles that I had during that situation, and the suicide thoughts, I mean, I found myself, I was at the local grocery store here. Like at the time, I didn't own any weapons because I didn't believe in having weapons in my house with the children. And you know, they don't make cars like they used to, where you can just turn the car on in the garage and just slowly slip away. And so I found myself at the local store, just looking for pills to take. Like, I'll just take these pills, because it was so much. It was so much. I was so open to her. I was so vulnerable to her that I would have done anything to hold on to her, to keep my family together. And nothing I did seemed to work. Like, she was insistent upon the circumstances that she was trying to have unfold for her. And I got lost in that, right? I got lost in it, trying to do what's right, because Allah says, you know, save yourself and your family. And I was trying to save my family with a person who was abusing me for trying to save my family. And she had the support of what appeared to be, to me at the time, of everyone.
Man up.
Yeah. Saying to me, how could you talk about her? What kind of man talks about a woman like that? Like, everybody coming against me. And it was like,
you even had a man that told you it was your fault. That's what you said, right?
Yes. Yeah. Told me if I'd have been a better husband, then this man wouldn't have been able to take my wife from me. Like, you know.
So that makes somebody feel invisible or something. Like, your pain
I mean, when you talk about dehumanizing, like, first of all, you have no idea what I provided to her. Like, maybe you should have asked those questions first, right? Relatively, I gave her a better life than 95% of Black women would experience, right? That I worked hard to give her that life. So imagine I did that, right? I worked 75 to 80 hours a week. I got like 3 hours of sleep a day, because I didn't want to. What I did is I set my schedule to where I didn't want, even though I worked a lot, I didn't want my family to feel like Dad's always at work, and then when he's at home, he sleep. So I would come home from work in the morning, cook the children breakfast, clean up the house, you know, to help her out, because she was a stay-at-home mom for 7 years. So I was helping clean up and make sure everything was organized so she wouldn't have the burden of that. And for me, I'm a very strong man. So my physical strength allows me to be able to do a lot. I can endure a lot physically. And so, you know, people would always say, like, how you working 2 jobs and you cook and you clean and you do all of this? And I'll be like, I don't know. That's a gift Allah has granted me to have, right? So to have someone say to me, of all people, right? I work 2 jobs. I don't sleep because I don't want my kids to feel like Dad's always sleeping. So my kids had the right. I need you to understand this. I'm working 80, 90 hours a week. And my kids still had the right to come and wake me up when they needed me. Just, you know, if they want to go outside, just come wake Dad up. I'm going outside to spend time with my kids. So I never wanted the fact that I had to work so hard to provide this life for my children, because that wasn't my dad. My dad worked hard, but my dad would come home from work, have a few beers, and then be out until it was time for him to go back to work. So I never, even though my dad was in the house and he provided for us, he was never really there. And I didn't want that for my kids. So even though I worked a lot, I'm saying I didn't get sleep. Right. And I told her, like, don't worry about it. Like, they'll wake me up when they need me. And they did. Dad, I want to go outside, because we didn't let them go. They were young, so we didn't let them go outside by themselves unless they stayed in the yard. But that meant they couldn't ride their bikes. So they would come and wake me up. I would come spend a couple hours outside and then go lay back down for an hour before I go to work. Now, imagine that dude coming to tell me if I would have did more for my wife, she wouldn't have left me for another man. And that's the life I'm living, where I'm getting 3 hours of sleep a day, so that I can provide for my children and be there for my children and be there for my wife. So, you know, I wasn't the dude who, you know, as a husband, I come home and my wife got stuff to say to me and she want to tell me stuff, and, you know, I don't want to hear it. Like, no, I couldn't wait to get home to hear what my wife had to say about her day, about the children, about her experience on social media. Like, we would talk like 6-7 hours a day. I'm that dude. Like, what more could I have done? And that's what gaslighting does. Gaslighting makes you ask yourself, damn, I should have did more. When there ain't nobody out there doing what you're doing, right?
Question your reality, and your reality becomes with the narcissist. Their reality becomes your reality.
Right. So,
And we have to be honest, there's no, black men are not working that many hours just because they want to.
right, right,
It's not happening.
right, right. Especially black men who are actually married and love their families, right? They are doing what they have to, not what they want to. And our financial situation and circumstance as a people as a whole indicates that this is going to be the reality of our family structures, right? Like, if you are trying to provide a traditional structure, which Islam promotes for us as men, black men, right? That we do want our women to be feminine. Like, I want my wife to be able to stay home. And if my wife does work, I want her to be able to. Like I just told my current wife, like, I want to do the best I can, right? Like, I have the burden of this child support, but I still want to do the best I can to make sure that if she's working, that her money is her money, right? Because Islamically, that is the standard. That's what makes a woman feminine. The ability to be able to experience life in the context of softness, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the context of softness. So I told my current wife, I'm going to work to make sure that you have the context that you have to be the greatest woman you can be. And that's a benefit to me, right? I get out of that, and that fills me up, and that validates me. And that's what I've been looking for, and that's what I'm building. In the previous context, I was trying to do that. Obviously, it was taken for granted, and it's not. That's part of the Islamic understanding, is that there will be women that will take for granted the things that a Muslim man is offering to them by Allah. I'm not talking about, this domination thing. I'm never talking about that. I mean, by Allah, right? Muhammad loved his wives. He provided for his wives. When you see the interaction between him and his wife, you get no sense of authoritarianism, right? Sometimes his wife was off the chain. Sometimes his wives were off the chain, and they had to be checked and corrected by Allah in the Quran, right? Like, so it's like, I'm not above that. My wife is not above that, right? And so I have the right to say to my wife, like, hey, babe, I'm worried about this, how this is going to impact our ability to be connected, right? And that's the way I communicate to my wife, right? That the objective is always organizing in a way, or aligning in a way, to the structure of love and the values of love, with empathy, compassion, kindness, and so on and so forth. And so, that was it's interesting, right? Because it was the most terrible experience I've ever had in my life. And if you know anything about my life, I've had some terrible experience. My parents were drug addicts. Like, of course, I've had some terrible experience. Mm-hmm. I've never been that low. And a part of me felt like, Allah don't take you through nothing without good reason. Allah knew my strength and my capacity and what my limitations were when I didn't know what my strength, my limitations, and what my capacities were. And so what that experience allowed me to do is to be able to contextualize me. Like, oh, okay, so now I've been pushed to the bottom of my limits, right? To the point where it's like, I don't want to be here anymore. Like, I'm tired of this place, right? And then to realize, to say, like, my therapist told me, she said, you have so much life in you to give to other people. It can't be that you don't want to be here. You just want the pain to stop. And when she said that, I was like, you're right. It's not that I don't want to be here, but I'm in a lot of pain. And there's not many people who understood enough where I was and what was happening to me in order to see what it was that I needed. And so instead, what was happening was everybody saw the experience in a way that validated themselves, not me, not what I was experiencing. They were very unempathic to me. right? And they were having an experience, and then they projected back onto me whatever that experience was, which pushed me down further, right? And you know, I'm being pushed down, I'm being pushed down, I'm being pushed down, but I still see Allah. I still see Allah. Like, it's not like I've been blind. There was no point at which I ever said Allah is not real. Why would Allah do this to me? It's just that the experience was a lot for me. So I never lost sight of Allah. I lost sight of myself. And I think it was a part of my process to I had to go through that process to be able to properly teach people what the experience was, so that they better know how to relate to somebody going through a similar experience, right? And so sometimes you have to go through that experience, because sometimes people go through the experience, but they don't learn nothing from it. And for me, I learned the reason you recognize the content that I have available for what we are doing now is because I had this capacity prior to the experience that I was able to use to hold on to as I went down. You know, it's like you're going down, but you still have that same capacity. And so I use that capacity that Allah has blessed me to have, right? It's not me saying I'm this. I'm saying, no, Allah blessed me with that capacity. And I use that capacity as I was pushed down to come back up and be able to communicate, not through just sharing with you my experience, but sharing with you my experience through what I learned about everything that's already structured out there. So it's not like I created this understanding of narcissism. Like, no, it was out there. We just didn't know about it. And so the experience forced me to learn about something that I otherwise wouldn't have learned about. I mean, I could have been that husband who has been like, oh, you want to be with another dude? Go be with another dude. I'll get another woman, right? That could have been me, but what would anybody have learned from that, right? And so I learned that people don't know how to deal with people who are depressed, who are suicidal. People make it a spiritual thing when it's not a spiritual thing, it's a psychological thing. And those two are related, but they are not the same thing, right? And so you're trying to give a spiritual diagnosis to a person who's having a psychological problem. And so sometimes those two are two different things, and they aren't conflicting ideas, right? They're paralleled, if you will, the spiritual and the psychological. They're not the same, they're not together, but they're parallel. And so you do want to maintain your spiritual connection, but you also want to make sure that you're psychologically sound, because you can have a person who spiritually look like they're on point, but actually be a narcissist. And that's a psychological issue. And if you don't know what the two are, you can have this person convincing you that you ain't practicing your religion right because it doesn't fit into their particular narrative.
Yeah, like this author,
oh yes, I read that book. I think you suggested it to me.
John Bradshaw, you mean, he speaks
Yep.
to my the root of my problems, you mean, and that toxic shame. And then, like I said, this is somebody that wasn't just somebody that's all learned academically. He's somebody that went through it. You know what I mean? He had experience. He had the 5 generations of alcoholism in his family, and a couple other things. So he went through it, and he was able to experience it in such a way that at the end he could teach it from a high level and be relatable to it to the people he was teaching to. I wanted to quote something from I got kicked out. Dr. Ramadi from one of her videos, and we're talking about invalidation and gaslighting. Somebody had commented on the video that she had did on cognitive dissonance, and one of the ladies that was going through dealing with a narcissist in their life, she had made a comment that said, talking about cognitive dissonance and dealing with a narcissist. She said, it's like gaslighting yourself, lying to yourself. It's losing your own self, your morality and your standards, and replace them with the narc's standards and reality. It's very dangerous because you are losing yourself to keep someone else. It's self-sacrifice, giving yourself up. offering yourself up to be devoured by another's appetite. Basically, I think a rejection of oneself to be used by someone else, like a death of yourself to live life for another. Psychological slavery.
So you have to understand cognitive dissonance, what it is, right? Cognitive dissonance is when you as an individual are holding two psychological ideas that are diametrically opposed, right? There are two ideas inside of you. They will rip you to shreds. So what people do is, in order to reduce the dissonance, in order to reduce the conflict, they will minimize one and elevate the other of the ideas, right? So it's not, the idea is still a cognitive dissonance, but the dissonance is less because they've rationalized. That's the self-gaslighting. You're self-gaslighting on behalf of the other person. So there's a problem. You love this person, but you also love yourself, but this person is hurting you. So what you do is you reduce the idea that this person is hurting you in order to elevate the fact that you love this person. And so that's when you start to do the gaslighting. And that's exactly what you just read, where a person is minimizing themselves, reducing their reality, reducing their perspective. So I hear people doing this all the time. You should, and this is probably going to get me in trouble with a lot of the audience. But I promise you, over time,
our safe space.
Over time, people are going to say, that brother said this, right? So sometimes you have to be an outlier. You have to say things that are not going to be popular.
This page is for
in order to move the pendulum back to the middle. So black men, and probably men in general, but you know, this is our space. Black men are often told that you should be involved with your children no matter how the mother of your children is behaving, right? That is an act of self-hate. That is an act of self-hate. It does not mean that you don't love your children. But if you don't love yourself, how is that an act of loving your children? That you are going to denigrate yourself, that you are going to dehumanize yourself, right? It creates a cognitive dissonance. I love my children, but I love myself too. And this person is using my children via the state as a weapon against me. And you should respond accordingly when somebody is weaponizing something against you. You don't run into the fire. If somebody's shooting bullets at you, you don't be like, I can absorb these bullets. No, you'll be dead. You'll be dead. So you need to take cover. And I'm telling men, for our own sanity, opt out of the madness. I'm not saying abandon your children. Be available to them when they come to you, right? In the meantime, you know, when you're on a plane, imagine you're on a plane, right? And they come and they give the instructions. In an event of, I don't know, whatever circumstance, I forget how they phrase it, a mask is going to drop down from the cabin. Mm-hmm. They always tell you, put your mask on first. First. Now, would anybody say that you putting your mask on first is abandoning your children? No. Nobody would say that. Why? Because if you don't put your mask on first and you die, there is nobody to help your children. There is nobody to help your children. So as you're putting your mask on, it means in the meantime, your children may be suffering. They may be suffering. But once you got your mask on, you are now equipped to serve your children to their true purpose. And I'm saying this system will kill you. The craziness of the mother of your children will kill you. Right? There are times when men kill the mother, the children, and then themselves. And everybody be like, what kind of man does that? Right? That's a good question. Because it's not like the man went around killing women and children all the time. Something happened. And we act like, so I said, we act like men aren't humans, like they don't have, like we can just absorb bullets, like we have this shield and you can just shoot psychological bullets at us and we're like, oh man, I can take it. Like, no, man, we all have our limitations, man. And nobody should be okay with a person being pushed to that point. And the data shows, man, like 80% of suicides are men. We can't take it. We're lying. We're lying. We can't take it. And we don't take it. We look like we take it. We project that we take it. But men commit suicide at a higher rate. They have higher usage of drug use and overdose, right? They're homeless at a higher rate. We're being smashed out here. Our humanity is being smashed. And in the meantime, we acting like we taking it. So I will always be available to my children in the context that does not destroy me. It doesn't destroy me. I have to be me. I have to be me first. And when my children get to know me, they're going to know this me, not the me that had to dehumanize myself and remove all dignity from me in order to observe some other person's mental health issues. I'm not doing it. It's not healthy for me. It's not healthy for the kids. I'm not teaching them that. But when my kids come to me, they will have a relationship with me that can nurture and fill them up from where I am as a full-fledged human being, not some psycho absorption mat where I just absorb the psycho crazy behavior of somebody just because the narrative says that that's what I should do. I'm telling you, we'll never get to a balanced place with that dynamic. The dynamic is not designed for us to get to a healthy place. So I always tell men, when you know that this is the game that is about to be played, opt out. But everybody else is saying opt in. Run into the slew of bullets, brother. Run into the slew of bullets. And you'll be dead, and you'll be a corpse, a walking corpse. You'll be a walking corpse. And your children, although they'll be close to you in proximity, they'll get nothing from you. And the evidence will show up in their relationships. And just go look at the relationships of people from divorced families. Just go look at them. All the data's out there. It ain't something I'm telling you. People are like, but what about the kids? What about the kids? What about the kids? I know, but generation after generation after generation is dysfunctional, dysfunctional, dysfunctional. Because children don't care what you say. They watch what you do. And so for me, if I want my sons to be men, I have to always be a man first. And being a man does not include self-deprecating behavior. There's nothing manly about that. But it's being promoted that way, right? Because that's a part of the gaslighting. That's a part of the gaslighting. Play this game. Play this game that the women want you to play. And they love it. These narcissistic women love it. The narcissists love playing the game, right? Because narcissists will take positive supply and negative supply. They'll take any supply. And they love it. Once they're done with you with the positive supply, they'll use you for the rest of their life with negative supply. That's why women love this co-parenting thing, right? Anybody who's promoting co-parenting have no idea what children's needs are. No idea what children's needs are. And remember, I told you, narcissism always, 100% of the time, comes from parenting. And co-parenting is the perfect context to produce narcissistic human beings. Because those children's emotional and psychological needs are not going to be met. These people are talking about the same thing that happened in the orphanage, right? People thought if we put these kids in the orphanage and we meet all their basic human needs, they'll be fine. But that wasn't the case. And co-parenting is now the modern day orphanage. And just look, I tell people all the time, look around you. Do you think we're producing, based on what you're seeing around you, quality human beings? And nobody will say that. But nobody thinks that they are the producers of those human beings. We all look at adults and say, man, that person crazy. None of us ever think what that person went through to get where they are. And so people say, like, are you telling men to abandon their children? Like, no, man, once the family was destroyed, the children were already abandoned. They were already abandoned. It's just what people want is for men to pretend like the children haven't been abandoned by doing this co-parenting thing. But children don't need their father in their life. They need their mother and father in cohesion in their life. That's the reason it takes two of us in the cohesive context to produce those children, right? You can't produce children without that intimate experience. That's cohesion. That's a physical and psychological cohesion. And you also need that cohesion to properly and optimally develop the best type of human beings. Anything else is an alternative structure, and it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And so that's why I tell people all the time. People be like, the prophet married divorced women. But what's interesting is he never married a divorced woman with children whose father was still alive, right? So there was no context where there was Muhammad, praise and peace be upon him, another brother, and the wife of that other brother, and all three of them are raising the children together. That situation just didn't exist. Any women that he was with that had children were all widows. The other husband was out the picture.
I don't think all his wives, they were either widows or like Aisha, who was never married. He was what?
Right.
They weren't the women that we talk about,
Right.
These are widows. I mean, the men that their husbands that died in battle and stuff like that,
Correct.
So it's a totally different thing that we're talking about.
It creates a dynamic that most people can't manage. I mean, it's crazy, right? Because I've seen these pictures of a picture of mom, stepdad, child, dad, stepmom, and then the child's in the middle, and everybody's like, this is how it's supposed to be. Like, nah, son. First of all, the fact that you got these two men in the picture together with the child tells you already who's in charge. It's going to be the biological mother. She's in charge. She's the head of that family structure. And the picture shows you that she's the matriarch of this hierarchy. That's what the picture shows you. So neither man is in charge. Neither man is in charge. And that context, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. And we don't do well with observation and analysis. And so what we do is, because it's what we doing, we think it's the right thing.
Right. And when you talk about what's going on with the co-parenting thing, to try to determine our fatherhood roles is somebody trying to determine our Islam, you mean? Because for us, Islam is a complete way of life. We have an application of rules and laws and a classification. Every deed, every action has a classification for it. And so somebody trying to determine how we conduct ourselves as fathers, they're trying to determine our Islam, how our Islam should be, and you got to resist that, If you
it
don't,
almost to me feels like shirk.
Almost, yeah.
Right? Because Islam tells us what the structure is. We don't even have to guess about it.
We have a structure, yeah.
But some people are saying like, nah, this structure works better, and like there's no evidence to support that. Mm-hmm. Like if you're gonna break the family up, and you're gonna have this context where you bring another man into the picture, Islam already tells you like what is supposed to happen with that. But that's not what we're doing, because that's not what works for us. And that, when you talk about the highest level of narcissism, that's the highest level of narcissism. When you disconnect from what Allah is saying in order to do your thing. Because the reality is you saying, I'm God, and I think this structure works better. Sometimes I have women saying stuff like, their father is this or their father is that, and he's not equipped. Like, that's inconsequential. Are they going to be safe with him? And if they're going to be safe with him, you don't have the right to determine whether or not he's equipped or not, because you forfeited that right when you had children with him. He's the same person. And Allah don't say the children stay with the father unless the mother approves. No, that's not what Allah says. That's not what he says. Right. And so you don't get to decide now. And that's why I did a video one time saying that, talking explicitly about the black context. Black women have no authority over you. They have no authority over you by Allah. By Allah, they have no authority over you. There is no context by which Allah gives authority to the women over the father. And the father is the authority of the children. Even if the children stay with the mother, the father is still the authority, even if they stay with the mother. So you don't. So even when you talk about the separation, or if you're going to co-parent. See, the problem with co-parent is not that the two parents are working together. It's the fact that the father has lost his authority. That's the problem with the co-parenting. But no woman, especially in this structure, is going to sustain the authority of the father in a co-parenting situation. She's just not going to do it because she don't have to. And there's no cultural context in which to impose that upon her. My ex put my children in the school I didn't want my kids in. Didn't matter to her what Allah says. Mm-hmm. Allah says, I'm responsible for their education. And you don't get to decide now that how I want my kids educated is in your domain. That's never in your domain. That's the authority that Allah has given to me, unless a court approves that I have lost my mind and lost my sanity and not capable of doing so. And then the court will make that ruling accordingly. But that's not what you did. And the problem is there are people in the Muslim community that are fully supporting her, despite the fact that she is going against Allah, that she is going against what Allah has revealed to us that is the necessary structure in this context, right? And that's one of the reasons for many women, when they had children with a man, they didn't divorce, because it's almost impossible for you to respect the authority of the father of your children in a relationship that you are not in. That's why the ideal situation is not for us to divorce, because the relationship itself imposes the natural order. Outside of the relationship context, you don't have to do that. I mean, how's she going to be married to another man, have your children in that other man's house, and have those children have regard and respect for your authority? That means the man, if my children are in her house with her man, he too has to respect my authority over my children. And what's the likelihood of that? What woman wants to get with a man that have to respect her ex-man? Like these situations and scenarios, man, are chaotic. They produce chaos. But because the results are insidious and happen over an extended amount of time, nobody ever connects the effect to the cause.
They don't even question. They just straight up gaslight you. You know, there's no intelligent argument that they make. It's just straight, you mean, oh, you're not a man. It's just gonna be straight going to those terms, you mean. You're not gonna find, I haven't seen any intelligent argument, any intelligent case made yet. Just only man up, real man will do this for his kids, to do whatever. Right. They're not making any intelligent arguments, you mean. There's no rational thought involved in this, you mean.
Yeah, it's funny, right? You'll see me construct this very rational and logical conclusion based on data, based on experience, like all of this research involved, and then somebody will come on and have a response telling me how they feel. Well, I just feel like you need to be involved in their life. Like, did you see what I just posted? The data is showing you that this is an act of futility. That you see, I'll give you an example. I'm on Instagram. Snoop Dogg's daughter is on Instagram. It's clear that he's not the authority of his family structure, right? He may produce resources for his family, but he's not the man. He's not a man. When I say a man, I mean in virtue. He's not the divine masculinity. He doesn't have integrity, modesty, fidelity, none of those things. So even though he's there, even though he's in his kids' lives, like his daughter, I mean, I hate to say it, like she's starting it up on Instagram. Like, and you see this in many of these particularly Hollywood structures, right? Where there is no masculine structure available. There's just resources. There's no structure. And so that's what co-parenting is. Co-parenting is resources with no structure. There's no structure. And I'm saying, don't surrender your manhood for this manless structure. It is a manless structure. And Allah has given to us the manly structure, the divinely manly structure. And we don't want that. We don't want that, though. And I get it, because how can you have respect and regard for somebody you don't respect and regard? But that's why if you can't have respect for his authority over his children, you need to give him his kids, because they need that. They need to be protected by that. And you may not have regard for that, but they're his kids. And it's too late for you now to say, like, you can't come to us with the argument of he's this and he's that. I know, but what does the structure say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell people there are only two cases that I can think of under which a father has to surrender his authority. Blatant immorality and abuse. Blatant immorality and abuse. If a man cheats on his wife, I think he should lose access to his children. We don't need children taught that. One of the things in the Quran, it says in the case of infidelity. So let's say a man cheats on his wife, right? He's to be lashed 80 lashes, according to the Quran, and not only lashed, right? Like, so we're not going to take you in the dungeon and lash you. Like, no. It says in the Quran that a group of believers have to witness this, right? And so what this means is your father will be known in the community to be an adulterer.
And let's just talk about the Sunnah. Obviously, we're not in the Islamic state, but if you're in the Islamic state, you talk about adultery. You talk about the punishment being death. You know what I mean?
Right.
So you totally.
And in that context, there's no need to have a custody battle.
Right. No custody battle.
There's no custody battle. So that's why I say, like, obviously we're not in the context where we put people to death for infidelity, but if death will make you to lose access to your children for that immoral act, I think you should lose access to your children as a result for the immoral act. But that's not what people do. And here's the interesting thing of it, right? And I say this about men, but this man or a woman. If you're a woman and you're involved in infidelity, you should lose access to your children. So when you don't take that position, what you end up doing is you trivialize infidelity. You minimize infidelity, right? And so because the cost of infidelity goes down, you create a cognitive dissonance in the parent who was the victim of that infidelity. So here's what I mean. So people will say, well, never talk bad about the other parent in front of the children. But just think about this for a second. If the punishment is 80 lashes, not in front of the children, in front of the whole community, is that, like, how is that not talking bad about the person? Like, we all were supposed to see this. For what? For what purpose were we supposed to see this, right? To know that person for who they were. And then the Quran goes further to say, and then after that, you can't marry a chaste person. You have to marry a person who was also in unchaste, right? So y'all have to get with each other. Y'all don't get access to the chaste people, right? And so what this is saying then is that your children now, as a result of this infidelity relationship and as a result of being cut off, right, you don't get access. And Allah says, man, in the Quran, don't show compassion for infidelity, lest your faith be called into question. Now your faith is called into question. And that's not what we do. Now we're co-parenting with somebody who cheated on their spouse, right? And now you can't even tell your kids, your cheating ass daddy or your cheating ass mama. Like, you can't even say that to them because, you know, that's wrong to say to your kids, to talk bad about the person. But that person made a choice. And that person made a choice to be publicly known as this. And if everybody else know your daddy is a cheater, your mama is a cheater, why shouldn't your children know? And there was a movie called Love and Basketball. And in the movie, the son comes home one day and his mom is sitting in the backyard next to the pool and she's crying. And the son is like, Mom, what's wrong? And she gave him an envelope because she had hired a private detective. And he found that the father was cheating with multiple women. And so when the son saw the pictures, right, the son, to me, had the appropriate response to a man cheating on his wife. I don't mess with you. You hurt my mom. You broke my mom. You did this to my mom. She was faithful and committed to you and you broke this. So the son cut off ties with his dad. And that was the end. And that's the appropriate response to a parent that has attacked the family structure. The parent attacked the family structure. But that's not, listen, you don't, it's clear to everyone that we have trivialized adultery. It's
Right.
clear.
Because even if you talk about the 100 lashes, but even like the Jews, where it was an incident where they covered up the verse, you mean, of stoning that they had in the Torah, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew what they was doing, you mean. He was like, oh, we parade them around the city, and they're known. So even that's bad enough compared to what's not happening today, because they were parading around like you're known, so everybody's gonna see it.
Everybody
gonna see it. Everybody's gonna see it. But they were covering up the verse of the stoning part, but just that part there though, even if that was at least going on, you mean, that would be more closer to the truth than what we do, you know, as far as making excuses for that type of behavior, you mean. Even
Allah says, don't make excuses.
Amongst Muslims, where you see some were like, I can see why they did it, you mean. I can see why they did it. And they don't even necessarily, they can be far removed from the incident, you mean. Far removed from the incident, not heard from the other person's side, and they saying they can see why the person that did it.
Right.
And you mean, so you talk about minimizing the transgression of the person, and worse than that,
almost honoring it,
and you're minimizing the pain and the suffering
of the victim.
The victim, you mean. They're invisible, you mean. So, and what that does to you, put you in a position that you likely to be vulnerable committing that same act, because you're not seeing the reality. You're not acknowledging the foulness of it. You mean yourself.
Right.
So
you reduce the cost. You subsidize the cost.
If you get in that situation, like, oh well, this ain't really that bad because this person really made me do it. You know what I mean? So
right.
you already got that in your head. You mean for your own self? You mean to justify
for you? Now that's your children's mentality, that's your grandchildren's mentality. It just becomes for each generation. It's just is a lot less. So we went from stoning to death to people who cheating to honoring people who cheat.
Yeah.
Like, and Allah says in the Quran that the goal of Satan is to make ill conduct fair seeming. Make ill conduct fair seeming. And I'm asking you, why she at the mosque and I'm out? Well, obviously, ill conduct is fair seeming, right? And she made a justification, gaslighting. The community made a justification, gaslighting. And so now there's this whole fog of infidelity, a fog of infidelity over the community now. The fog of gaslighting. Like if you think of a fog, right, this dark cloud over a masjid now, where this whole situation existed, everybody covered it up and honored the person who did it. Honored the person who did it. And so just imagine all the children who grow up in that context. And then later on, we're going to be arguing like, ain't nobody faithful and can't trust nobody. But that didn't happen overnight. There's no cost. You guys reduce the cost that Allah said don't do. And it's like sometimes we think Allah's just, I suggest that y'all do this. Like, no, man, Allah know what he's talking about, man. He knows what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen even like people that are very soft on the good way with our women, and champion the black women's cause and stuff. You know what I mean? Even with the Jada situation, I guess if you watch that interview live, I guess I'm thinking this person, because I saw a person, you mean like oh man, it's just wrong. How is a double standard? How she gets a pass for it, you mean? Their audience, I mean, from what they saw coming from people, even that person was like, wow, that's not anything right. You mean? I'm like, yeah. So I think that person was gonna take that position, because I saw that they're usually very soft champion, you mean, black women, you mean? But
right.
He's like, wow, this is just wrong, you mean? And right. It's like what I saw from that interview, she never saw it as something wrong. And I was talking to
there was
my brothers.
No humility, none.
No humility, and she actually like championed it like it was an honor. Like you mean, like she looked at it as a good thing. She said like, because I gained such and such, such and such. She didn't consider it transgression, even though he considered it a transgression. He said it, transgression. Used the word transgression. She went against that term being a transgression. She looked at how it was an empowering moment for her. You mean, and everything like that. No accountability. You know what I mean? and you can clearly see that he was hurt from it. So all that speculation about open marriage anyway, you want to minimize the situation by saying it's open. They always had open marriage, but you see that he's clearly hurt. If you watch it, he's clearly hurt. It was very uncomfortable. And I'm talking to one of my brothers who he's been in a healthy marriage for 15 years and everything like that. How uncomfortable it was to watch. You know what I mean?
Right.
How uncomfortable, how horrible it was to watch. Just you see how he just is still eating at him. You mean?
Yep.
And he's trying to save face. He's a good actor. You mean?
Right.
But he couldn't do it. Everybody saw that he couldn't do that.
Right. You can see it in the expressions. Right.
Whatever you try to say, separation. You mean? No. I mean, people that separated, and they still don't want somebody else. They still consider that their wife. They don't want nobody else up on their wife. You mean even right. Separated? It's not always planned. You mean even if it looks like it might be planned. You mean like the man might out of his pride make it seem like I was cool with the separation, but he really ain't cool with it. You mean?
No, you can't be. You can't be if you love the person. If you love the person, you can't be cool with it.
He really, really deep down wanted to work it out. You mean? So I don't see. So they bring up that stuff. Give it pass. So it's all this stuff that was going on, just minimizing, invalidating, gaslighting to make it seem like she was okay. You mean what she did? You mean when all the signs from herself? You mean showing like that was terrible. You mean?
Well, that's why I said she's a covert narcissist, right? She's a covert narcissist. It wasn't grandiose.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't grandiose in the sense that I'm Jada, I can do whatever I want. But there was an underlining, like, hey, it was what I needed at the time, right? Like, we had this situation, I needed something, and I'm entitled, right? Almost as if, well, you haven't given me what I needed, so I had the right to go out and get it somewhere else. When, no, that's not exactly how this works. You don't have the right, and you were not entitled. And she didn't have, so when you talk about, so we all saw Will Smith's, response. How come she didn't see it? How come she didn't think in that moment, like, oh my God, my husband is hurt from this. Regardless of it don't even matter what the context was or how it happened, right? I'm not minimizing this in any way. These things happen. Nevertheless, people are hurt. And how can you not connect? How can you love somebody and not connect with their pain? If you cheat on your wife and it hurts your wife, her pain, if you are empathic, should be your pain. I'm sorry, babe. I'm sorry this happened. I can imagine the impact on you. I would never do that again. And you should be about building up and securing that bond and that attachment so that person doesn't have to feel that. And that's not what she did. She validated herself, and she didn't care what his experience was.
Okay. Now, you have a question. There's one question here. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna break real quick to pray, and I'll let you answer the question from somebody that you may know, somebody named Maya. Has the question. The question is: so a cheater should never be forgiven. And I'll be back in a few.
Okay, so that question is an interesting question, right? So the first thing is, that's the right of the people in the relationship. The right of the people in the relationship is to determine what the boundaries of that relationship are going to be for them, right? So, but in order for that to happen, this can't get out. It can't get out into the public. People recover from infidelity all the time. And oftentimes I've heard people say that infidelity has saved their marriage, right? So they had a relationship, infidelity occurred, and then on the other side of the infidelity, they had it made them understand the seriousness of the relationship itself. So on the other side of infidelity, the relationship got better. But they have to protect the context of that within themselves, right? So if a wife is going to forgive her husband for an infidelity, she can't bring that to the community, because once it's in the community, there's the option to turn back is taken away from us by Allah, right? But man, here's the thing. I say there are two reasons for a person to divorce: abuse and infidelity. But a person has to discern for themselves if that's what they want, right? So this wouldn't even be out in the public if August had kept his mouth shut. If August had kept his mouth shut, it wouldn't be out in the public, and Will and Jada may have been better on the other side of that infidelity than they were before it happened, right? That's a possibility. I've seen it happen. I know the research and the data suggested that is the case. So absolutely you can forgive a person for cheating. But once it's publicly known, the position that we are forced to take, right, as a result of this publicity, this is why Islam teaches us, right? Like, you have to have 4 witnesses, and 4 witnesses could be that the person who committed the act told 4 people that they committed the act. And once those 4 people know, now as a community, we have to take a different position versus if you only told one person and that person asked you, so what do you want to do with your relationship? Do you want to save your marriage or not? If you want to save your marriage, then you guys need to do the work that you need to do, right? Like Allah, it's amazing. It's amazing for us as Muslims that Allah give us this contextualizes our structure for marriage in a way that allows us to be able to even overcome a situation like this, right? So there's a point where you can't turn back, but there are many opportunities that we have to decide for ourselves if this is what we want, right? And so a wife could testify 4 times on behalf that, particularly in this day and age where she's found a photo or they made a tape and she found the tape, right? Like, then the evidence, obviously you can show it to 4 people and that's enough evidence, but I'm saying that there is space for redemption, right? Even in infidelity amongst the religious community, but we don't want to what we don't want to do is have it be a public spectacle and then have it be a public spectacle and then have it honored and have compassion for it, right? If you as the woman still love your husband and still want your relationship and this situation has happened, then keep that between you and your husband. Make sure you communicate with the person, or he needs to communicate, or somebody needs to communicate with the person. This is over and done, right? Because understand, the punishment per Islam is both of the people involved get lashed, right? So have the conversation with the person. This is to never happen again. And we are going to move forward with securing our family and developing love from this point moving forward. And you absolutely have the right to do that. And the same thing with abuse, right? Abuse is not abuse. I guess what I'm saying is, depending on the severity of the abuse, right? Because the vast majority of abuse is what they call bidirectional, right? It means women initiate physical abuse just as much as men initiate physical abuse. And in situations where abuse is unidirectional, women actually are more likely to hit and be violent towards men and men not respond than the other way around. And so what I'm saying is, like, even when we talk about physical abuse, right? We want to be mindful of the reality that all abusive relationships don't need to come to an end, right? You can't have 2 people who find themselves in an extreme position where they are fighting and physical with each other, and they can find therapy and they can find help to help them get over how they interact with each other. Because I'm sorry, I can't see any questions, so I don't know if you're asking me a rebuttal question. So I have to wait till the brother gets back. But the point that I'm making is, relationships can overcome anything if, and this is a big if the people involved are willing to do the work that is needed to overcome them. But if you have one person in the context that's not willing to do the work to overcome them, then the relationship is just not going to survive. A relationship cannot, I mean, it's a relationship, right? It's relating to each other. It is the relating, bringing order back, bringing structure back, redoing something, bringing it back. And that can absolutely happen in a relationship. Infidelity does not always mean that the relationship needs to come to an end, but infidelity is a justification for a person who wants to bring a relationship to an end. So that's absolutely acceptable. What I don't want to do is try to convince people that they have to stay in a relationship where this has occurred. But that's going to be something that each person needs to decide for themselves, whether or not they are going to, they're going to do the work that is necessary to sustain that relationship. And also, I'm trying to see if I could. And ultimately, what this is really all about is having the appropriate foundation of the relationship, right? If the foundation of the relationship is love, then you do have the capacity to overcome any and everything. And in most cases, you can avoid situations like this if the fundamental basis for the relationship is love. But people get into relationships for many reasons. And that's how you end up in infidelity. And sometimes the infidelity reveals to you that you actually do love this person, right? That you do love this person. And so, and that's what people are experiencing. So we want to make sure that I'm not saying that infidelity means divorce automatically. I'm saying infidelity offers us an understanding that allows for people to be able to recover, right? And that's the hope for me, right? In my understanding, when you talk about the 4 witnesses regarding infidelity, right? Like that's a very high standard. Finding 4 people who like either saw the act or heard from the person themselves that the act occurred, right? Having 4 people have this, Allah is creating the space for us to overcome that. But like I said, once 4 people know, then it's a communal issue. And I don't think you can come back from that, at least with not any integrity, right? That you yourself will are accepting the reality of that situation and circumstance. And I'm saying we don't want to impose a context where we're telling people you need to work on overcoming infidelity, because you don't. It is an act that could have a devastating psychological impact on you. And I would never ask anybody to remain in a context where they have to dehumanize themselves in order to save the relationship. And so the point really, when you talk about infidelity, you're talking about can the person connect with you in a human way as a result of the act that is happening. And so when you watch the interview with Will and Jada did not connect with Will in a human way. She didn't acknowledge his pain and suffering at all. And so that's what let me know, like, she's a covert narcissist. Because in many occasions you listen to Jada and it's like, oh, okay, I can feel that, I understand that. And then you see her in her actual relationship and how she is relating to her partner and how she is connecting with his pain and his suffering. I mean, like I said, you see the memes all over Facebook of Will like holding back the tears, right? Which shows you that he's an empathic and loving person, but his wife was not connected to that at all. She just talked about what she needed and she wasn't concerned whatsoever about what his impact was. So if somebody asked me, should they divorce? Like, I don't want anybody to divorce, but it's just not a good sign that she was not empathic to what her partner, the man she claims to love, was experiencing as this situation was reoccurring. I can't see the comments, so you'll have to let me know. Like,
okay, so I think she's talking about Jada. She gets no pass. Maya said she gets no pass, and she said 7 minutes later she said cover the faults of your brother. So I don't know what you were mentioning then.
Yeah, I explained to the degree at which you can do that, but it cannot become a danger and the harm to the community at large. And that's That's the biggest thing. You know, sometimes people be like, stay out of married people business, but we're a community, and there's no, when you talk about, there's a strategy for resolving marital conflict. That means people have to be involved. So there is no stay out of people business. Like, there's a point where you two can't resolve this alone, and you need to bring other people in, and those other people need to know you, right? So it says bring people from your family, bring people from her family, you know, and have mediators on both sides, and then the mediators intervene, and they hear both sides, they hear the sides of the family, and then the mediators get together independent of the two people and try to discern, like, is this savable, is this, like, there's a whole process to go through divorce and what needs to happen that respects the humanity of everybody in the process that we don't follow at all. And so that's a part of, I mean, a part of it is whatever we decide to do. Remember, the objective is to protect love. Like, that's the objective. And sometimes infidelity could be the springboard that initiates both people understanding their responsibility to love. But a lot of times, most of the times, infidelity is an indicator that there is no love in this situation and that there is no love possible in this situation. And in that case, then maybe the relationship needs to be terminated and save what you can and what you will.
Okay. What about, I heard Dr. Ramani mention the term, and it was a newer term that she came up with as regards to dealing with a narcissist, breadcrumbing.
So narcissists do what they call intermittent reinforcement. Intermittent reinforcement. And the term that you hear people use is breadcrumbing, right? What they do is, when they're gaslighting you, see, if a person just abused you, you know to get away, right? Because there's nothing to be attached to. Every time I come around, they abuse me. But they don't. They do what they call intermittent reinforcement, meaning they abuse you, they devalue you, and then every now and then they throw you a crumb. Like, you so handsome, right? And you're like, oh, see, they still love me, right? There's still a connection. Or, you're so smart, right? It's like, it's not full on love bombing, but it's reminiscent of love bombing, right? It's like the crumb of love bombing to make you to they see you slipping and they try to do something or say something to rope you back in because they're not done using you as their supply. I think that's what she was referring to, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's breadcrumbing. It's like pieces of love bombing. It's not the full on love bombing, but it's like every now and then, you know, it's when you'll hear people say they'll have a traumatic, sometimes physical fight, and then they'll be like, but we had amazing sex afterwards, right? Mm-hmm. That's breadcrumbing. Sex doesn't sustain a relationship, right? Sex, the nature of your sex is the result of the fulfillment and the connection in a relationship. So every now and then they'll use that in order to get you back in so they can keep abusing you. And it's just enough to keep you there, to keep you connected to the beginning of the relationship where everything was fascinating, everything was phenomenal, you was great, they were mirroring your values back to you. Well, they ain't doing that no more. But every now and then they throw you a bone. So you have to be mindful of these practices so people can know like what's happening or what's occurring.
She mentioned that over time a person gets used to the breadcrumbs where it sustains them. Those little pieces.
Yeah, it's what you hope for. This is what you hope for, right? And they give it to you, and boom, it gives you a boost in the moment, right? And the thing is you never, that's why it's called intermittent reinforcement. You never know when it's going to happen. So they treating you like crap, disparaging comments, you know, snide remarks, sarcasm, all this thing exists. And then you get a situation like maybe you out publicly with somebody and they honor you publicly, right? But then in private, so in the public setting, you're like, oh, they do love me. Okay, I needed that. And then in a public setting, you always showing off in front of people. Like, oh, so that wasn't real. Like, it worked for the moment. It shows other people validate you. You have such a wonderful husband, and you feel like, oh, you feeling good about yourself, right? Because you're being validated. But as soon as the camera is turned off, soon as the lights are turned off, it's back to Mr. Hyde. Mr. Hyde's back.
Little boy, little girl, little.
Right.
So that's what you can say. That's what white supremacy has been doing to us.
Oh, yes.
Breadcrumbs, and it sustains us like we really getting something.
Right? Because I'm not saying this. Obviously, that's not my belief. But if the superior being is acknowledging you, that means a lot to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I had somebody I respect. Right? That's why I say sometimes you're gaslighting yourself on behalf of the person that is gaslighting you. But I heard the person say, I'll never trash all white people because this one white person did this for me and it was very helpful for me. And I didn't respond to it because sometimes I can tell when it's not going to be effective, when the communication is not going to be effective. But they should be helping you on equal terms, not helping you as they remain in their position over you, right? So their helping you is still an indication of their power over you. Like, because he was saying, like, he was in Sudan and, it was a white person who helped him. Like, the question is, why weren't the Sudanese able to help you, right? Like, why did it have to be that white person? Well, because, white supremacy. So, yeah, they can still be racist and do a good thing for you. That don't take away the white supremacy because they're nice, right? Narcissists are often nice, right? Narcissists will do some amazing things for you. One of the reasons narcissism won't go away is because they're very useful, right? They get things done that other people won't get done because sometimes it's going to take you, like, you need an impenetrable field, and narcissism is an impenetrable field. You ask a narcissist to do something, they'll get it done whatever the cost, right? And some of us, we can't get it done because we care too much about other people. So there's some things that we won't do, but the narcissist will do it all. And so we should be, and that's really the benefit of this conversation, is understanding, like, who these people are and what they are capable of and what the context is that is facilitating that capacity.
Okay. What about the term narcissistic injury?
Narcissistic injury. You have to. So remember, I told you the narcissist form this false self. It's what they call the false self, because there is no real self of the narcissist. Whatever your experience is, it's a mask to cover up the insecurity. And so narcissists are extremely insecure, and it is that insecurity that is driving everything that they do, right? And so narcissistic injury is when you do anything that brings harm to the image of the narcissist. Anything that brings harm to the image of the narcissist. And so it could be anything. It could be criticism. Like, it doesn't really matter what it is. The narcissist is going to catalog that thing, right, as an attack. It could be constructive criticism. That ain't how they took it, though. And depending on the context, they may let you know right away. I said this in the last video. You offer some criticism of the narcissist, and the next thing you know, there's an onslaught of things that you did. Well, you did that, and you always do that, and that's why I don't like you. Or you have this attitude and your tone and all this, like, right? It's like you just mentioned to them that sometimes they leave the orange juice out of the refrigerator when they pour the glass. And it's like the next thing you know, there's this onslaught attack. That is a result of narcissistic injury, which on the flip side creates what they call narcissistic rage. And so it's a narcissistic injury because the narcissistic rage is not compensatory to the act itself. And what that means is you did something, and the way they responded it You can tell there's something more. Well, what's more? It is the narcissistic injury. So narcissistic injury is like there's this original wound that created the damage, and now any slight bump against that wound, and it's like, right? They're on the attack, and the full attack, and they'll destroy you. They'll destroy everybody around them if they get in that state. And so you have to be aware of that, and that's why a lot of people say, just go no contact. Because all of this stuff that I'm telling you, all of this is happening, and you don't even know it's happening. And this person is just, they're setting up everything, right? Remember I told you, they have a list of things that you've done wrong that you didn't know nothing about until you talked about the orange juice. It's like, damn, that's a very passionate response for me just telling you, put the orange juice back in the refrigerator. And so it's important to know what those things are, and to know them to the degree to which you want to be able to understand when narcissistic abuse is occurring, right? Sometimes for me, I know when a person is a narcissist so sometimes I'm having these conversations, right? Like, you just imagine you and I are having this serious conversation, and it's on Facebook, and then you see a person giving a reaction of laughter. Like, wait, what's funny? Like, I don't think either one of us said anything funny. Like, this is some traumatic stuff we're talking about, and you do a laughing emoji, right? Like, that's sort of an indication that you're dealing with a narcissist, right? They are not connected to the pain and the suffering of the conversation. It's not getting the correct response. And a part of that is because they're detached. That person is laughing at you. They are, imagine somebody in pain and you laughing. Like, why are you laughing? Like, and I tell people that all the time. I don't understand what you laughing at, because I didn't say anything funny. There was nothing I said that was funny. Like, all of this stuff, it's like if somebody was raped, you wouldn't laugh if they were telling you the story. That would be insane, right? Well, this is a psychological rape, and there's nothing funny about it, right? Because it is the abuse that occurs before any other abuse occurs. And so knowing narcissistic injury, what that is, how the person is responding, and taking that seriously, right? Because once you realize that this person is using the tools of narcissism against you, you need to start reevaluating your relationship with them.
She mentioned that she gave the comparison to like somebody that broke their leg in so many different places that they're cautious. So this narcissist, they're always cautious of their injury. So they're in their insecurity, they always so the littlest thing can trigger that.
Right. They're compensating. Their response is a compensation for the deep insecurity that they have. Right. The deep insecurity is brokenness. It is brokenness. They are broke. And so anything that reveals that brokenness or is a risk of revealing the brokenness, they're going to defend fiercely. And they will. And the thing about them is they will never stop. They will never stop. Once they recognize that you are a threat to them, they will never stop. So there's no reconciling. That's why when people say stuff to men like, you got to co-parent with her no matter what. Oh yeah, they like that. They like that.
Yeah.
They like that idea. That's exactly what they want. They want to maintain control over you. And so I'm telling men, nah, man, don't engage them in a way that compromises you, even if it's for the children. And so what you should do, and this is what I do. I don't have a relationship with my children, so I spend my time teaching and educating people to build a better world for my children to be in. And when my children come to me, inshallah, I will be able to have a conversation with them about what my experience was, about what their experience was, and how we create an appropriate relationship without that backdrop of their mother's insanity being the narrative for my relationship to them. And so I pray for my children as they mature and as they grow, that somebody could, I know this is not going to be the case, but somebody whisper in their ear, like, it's not what you think with your father. You need to reach out to your father, right? For me, it's not safe, right? And a part of it not being safe is because, when a person has gaslighted you for a long, they are in you and you have to push back against that. And sometimes that's why they say go no contact, because that person knows all your triggers. They know all your triggers, and you'll never get rid of those. You'll never get rid of those triggers. That's why they say go no contact, because that person is abusive. You were supremely vulnerable and open to that person, and they use that against you as a weapon. And you're still you. You're still empathic. You're still this person. And so my fight is against these people from a distance that's safe for me, right? And so unfortunately, that means a distance that's from back from my children, right? Because they will use the children against you. I don't even know why anybody argues that. We've all seen it happen. These videos, I remember a video of some woman arguing with her child, like, I'm gonna call the police because, you know, the child seat ain't buckled in right. Like, you gonna call the police because the child seat ain't buckled in right? Like, bro, like, don't do this. This is not good for you. This is not good to happen in front of your children. Your daughter's learning this is how you engage with men. Like, I don't know a solution for this that is going to be viable. Just back away, maintain your sanity, facilitate virtue in the world, and the children will be drawn to that, because there are very few good people in this world right now. So just be a good person, and the people who need to be with you will find you.
Yeah. And I actually know actual experience of somebody. This is before we had the knowledge of all this stuff, you know, and this brother was young at the time, you mean, before he became Muslim, and in one of his relationships, one of the mothers of his children, it just want to be in a child's life, but it's always you gotta fight, and he already knew to assess the damage, you mean, that already been done to him. He like, I can't do this, you mean, if I gotta be on your terms and your unrealistic terms where I can't do this. I mean, my children, hopefully, you mean, they'll find out about me later, and you mean be able to forgive me, but I can't do this on your terms and keep my sanity. That's what his before even
can't do this on your terms and keep my sanity. Can't do both. You just can't, man. You're a human being. You're not Superman. You're not built to, Superman can take bullets. You cannot. These are psychological bullets. Get out the way. Take cover until it's safe. And given the way the system is, it's not going to be safe for you as long as they're under their mother's authority, and they are under her authority. And if she crazy and the kids are under her authority, and you need to negotiate with her and she's crazy, then you under her authority too. And I'm saying, no, don't do it. It's not worth it. The return on investment is not going to be what you think it is. It's not going to be what you think it is. Your daughter is going to end up being Jada.
Mm-hmm.
That's who your daughter going to be. And your son is going to end up being Will on TV, fighting back tears after being devastated of having this young man plundering your wife, the woman you love. And now you got to deal with that for the rest of your life with a woman who doesn't see your pain. And that's the terrible part. And so I'm saying, that's why I encourage black men, don't entertain these things, right? And the reality is if you guys were able to work together, that's what the marriage was for. And so people need to, for the benefit of children, start taking marriage a little bit more seriously, start taking mental health a little bit more seriously, and stop this gaslighting. The gaslighting, it ruins all of us. Like, you think it's a benefit to the person who's doing the gaslighting. No, they lose too. Everybody loses. So stop it. Just stop it. Try to be the best human beings we can do. Try to give our children the best opportunity we can. And just make sure that everything you do is fundamentally founded in love, in real, genuine, and sincere love.
No, definitely. I don't know if there's any other terms, that you had in mind.
We're at the 3-hour mark. I think we should start wrapping this up. I will give some closing remarks here before we close out. Were there any more questions first?
There's no more questions.
Okay. Give me 1 second here. So these conversations, again, even though it's a space for Black men, it's a space designed to move us to a direction of our optimal experience, whether it's for us, facilitating the optimal experience of our wives and our women, facilitating the optimal experience of our children. But you can't do that compromising the best you. Don't compromise the best you for anything, for anyone, right? Noah in the Quran was going to compromise the best him for his son. And Allah told him, no, that is not your son, right? He is not connected to you in a way that a son should be connected to his father, right? And there was a reason for that. Like, you have to know the context of that relationship that created that, right? And so understanding that, facilitating that reality, and making sure that all of these conversations, as I said, we're not here to bash women. We're here to speak the truth. We're here to educate people on what is available to us to understand the reality of our lives and to contextualize it in a way that is getting the best and most intimate experience out of our lives, right? We want the best for ourselves and the best for everybody around us. And I posted a status yesterday asking, for the people who are giving you advice, what are the chances that they are giving you advice that is best for you and everybody around you, right? And that everybody around you is a key part, because that may mean that if they're giving you the best advice, it may be advice that also makes the other people around you. So as people join us in these conversations that you and I have had, and inshallah will have in the future, that these conversations will help people to go to the people around them, have these conversations, try to figure out, like when you talk about self-knowledge, you also got to talk about your family of origin. Like, what is the reality of your family of origin? Because if you don't know that, then you don't even know who you are, right? And you may be playing a particular role in the context that is conducive to the authoritarian nature of the narcissist in that network, and you don't even know it. And so you can have a person like you or myself who are, I'm not saying I'm versed in Islam, but have some fundamental understanding of Islam and still be within the context of Islam, operating under narcissistic abuse and gaslighting ourselves about what Islam is to protect the interests of people that we've placed over us that really don't have no position of authority over us.
Exactly. Yeah. So in closing, because we are still learning. We're still learning how to practice it the proper way. We got a lot of restriction in our communities because it's not going to be an individual effort. We talk about the broader community, which the Black Muslim community is connected. The same problems in the Black community are in the Black Muslim community.
There are problems, yeah.
We're not going to have an individual solution to problems that are politically backed on one side, where it's uneven. And I'm getting at that.
Right. I mean, even I talked about me and my strength. I ain't that strong, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to change the culture.
Okay. And so, lastly, once again, I'll just remind everybody, for those that listen now and those listen later, that this structure, this platform, might be one of the results of one of our African, one or two or more of our African sheikhs in Islam. I say my brother-in-law, his family, were good with the Sisi family, and Hassan Sisi was sent over here to help with Black Muslims over here, and he was successful in reaching a lot. And they used to come to the Dakar Synagogue and spend time, and they used to host. My brother-in-law used to host them. I mean, they would be treated as their guests, and whenever you have guests, the guests always give you something. And you think about all those moments they were able to see and know the different members of the family. It just can be just one time of hey, so and so's here, make do that you such and such. So just this platform itself can be a result of one of the duos. Where I'm at right now is in the house of my brother-in-law and my sister, and this can be a result of one of those duos, as those that family you mean. Um, Starting with Sheikh Ibrahim Niyas, the grandfather of Hassan Sisi, are considered, you mean, those who were close to Allah, those who were also champions of the race. You mean they were connected. Like Ibrahim Niyas, he advised Kwame Nkrumah. You know, he advised Patrice Lumumba. You mean, so he was active. You mean, in a struggle. You mean, he was active in the struggle
Right.
for uniting and freeing Africa. You mean, so these were people that were just not sitting the corner and pray and worry about themselves. They were active with helping people and breaking different chains, spiritual, psychological slavery. You mean, that's what these people came from. And you know, so the best word is the word of truth to a tyrant. You mean, those we know those leaders at that time, at the time of Malcolm X, they paid the ultimate price for trying to free their people. You mean, and Sheikh Ibrahim was one of those advisors, and his family carried on his work of doing service for humanity. So this could be the result of one of those duos, you mean. So we appreciate everybody for listening, those who listen at different times and those who will listen later. And we look to continue this discussion in the future.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you, my brother, and assalamu alaikum to you, and enjoy your day. Once again, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate always when people reach out to me and feel like my content is valuable and should be shared with the public. So I appreciate that. We're trying to have healthy relationships, healthy community, and that means we have to have discussions at many different levels, right, about what is out there and how we come to reach our full potential as human beings, particularly as it pertains to us as Muslims, right? Allah says in the Quran that Muhammad was a, present peace be upon him, he was a light to us, and that we should be a light to humanity. So inshallah, we pray that that what people get from this conversation is plenty of light.
Okay. So I'll end with a silent Fatiha, dedicating and rewarding this to all our teachers, to all the righteous in Islam, Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, his companions, and all those who follow the right guidance. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.